We live in a world that feels solid, predictable, and governed by reliable laws. Objects stay where we put them. People die only once. Streets don't vanish overnight. Our memories, while imperfect, generally align with documented reality. But what happens when these fundamental assumptions about existence suddenly break? Today, we're diving deep into 20 meticulously documented accounts of reality's strangest hiccups. Moments when the universe seemed to skip like a scratched record, revealing glimpses of something far more mysterious beneath the surface of ordinary experience. These aren't tales of the supernatural or stories designed to frighten. They're accounts from credible people, doctors, scientists, teachers, engineers, who encountered small impossibilities that changed their understanding of what's possible. What makes these glitches particularly compelling is their ordinariness. No one was seeking mystical experiences or supernatural encounters. They were simply going about their daily routines when reality decided to demonstrate that it might be far more flexible, creative, and mysterious than we typically assume. Dr. Amanda Foster, a digital forensics expert, watched her smartphone teleport across her bedroom while remaining connected to a charging cable too short to reach its destination. Detective Michael Chen discovered that a pair of socks could vanish from a closed drawer and reappear 3 days later, unchanged and perfectly folded. Film professor Dr. Elena Rodriguez documented thousands of people who shared vivid memories of a movie starring comedian Sinbad that never existed in any official records. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a vast, largely hidden catalog of experiences that suggest our world operates according to principles more complex and wonderful than our everyday awareness typically recognizes. Some researchers theorize about quantum mechanics scaling up to everyday objects. Others explore the possibility of parallel realities bleeding through. Still others focus on the mysterious nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to physical reality. But here's what's truly remarkable. These glitches don't seem random or chaotic. They follow patterns. Objects that disappear return to logical locations. False memories are shared by thousands of people with remarkable consistency. The impossible events feel meaningful to those who experience them, as if reality itself is trying to communicate something important about its own nature. As we explore these 20 accounts together, you might find yourself remembering your own brushes with the impossible, moments you dismissed as tricks of memory or quirks of perception. Perhaps that's exactly what they were. Or perhaps they were something far more interesting. Brief windows into the true nature of a reality that's far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to imagine. So settle in, open your mind, and prepare to question some of your most basic assumptions about how the world works. Because once you start noticing the glitches, you might discover they're happening all around us, all the time. Quiet miracles hiding in plain sight, waiting for anyone curious enough to pay attention. The matrix of reality, it turns out, might be far more glitchy than we think. And that's not a bug. It's a feature of a universe that refuses to be as ordinary as it pretends to be. Are you ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes? 1. The case of the disappearing keys. Sarah Martinez had always been meticulous about her belongings. As a project manager for a busy marketing firm, organization wasn't just a preference. It was a necessity for survival. Her keys had their designated spot on the small wooden bowl by her apartment door, placed there religiously every evening when she returned home from work. This routine had been ingrained in her for over 5 years, as automatic as breathing. On a particularly ordinary Tuesday morning in March, Sarah's well-ordered world experienced what she would later describe as her first encounter with reality's technical difficulties. She woke at her usual 6:30, went through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, and reached for her keys in their familiar spot as she prepared to leave for an important client presentation. The wooden bowl was empty. At first, Sarah assumed she'd simply forgotten to place them there the night before. Memory can be fallible after all, and perhaps the stress of the upcoming presentation had disrupted her usual patterns. She began a systematic search of her apartment, checking all the logical places first. The kitchen counter where she sometimes set down groceries. Nothing. The coffee table where she occasionally tossed mail, empty. Her purse, her coat pockets, even the refrigerator, because sometimes people do inexplicably strange things when distracted. As minutes ticked by and her search grew increasingly frantic, Sarah found herself checking impossible places. Inside the microwave, under the couch cushions, in the bathroom medicine cabinet. The rational part of her mind knew these locations made no sense, but desperation has a way of making the impossible seem worth investigating. 25 minutes into her search, with sweat beginning to bead on her forehead despite the cool morning air, Sarah made a decision that felt both logical and absurd. She returned to the wooden bowl by the door, the very first place she had looked, hoping against hope that somehow her keys had materialized in the intervening time. They were there, sitting in the exact center of the bowl, positioned precisely as she always left them, as if they had never been anywhere else. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the keys that had somehow returned to their rightful place. The metal felt cold against her palm when she picked them up, solid and real and completely ordinary. No amount of rational thinking could explain what had happened. She had checked that bowl at least 6 times during her search, running her hands around its entire circumference, even lifting it and looking underneath. The drive to work that morning felt surreal, as if she were moving through a world that had revealed itself to be less stable than she'd previously believed. During her presentation, she found herself wondering if reality was always this fluid, and we simply don't notice most of the time because we're not paying attention. In the days that followed, Sarah began documenting similar incidents with obsessive detail. Her coffee mug appearing in the dishwasher after she distinctly remembered leaving it on her desk. Her favorite pen vanishing from her briefcase only to reappear in her home office, despite not having used it there for weeks. Each incident was small, easily dismissed, but together they formed a pattern that challenged her understanding of how objects behave in space. She started researching online, discovering that her experience wasn't unique. Forums and message boards were filled with similar accounts, people describing objects that vanished and reappeared, always returning to logical locations after thorough searches had confirmed their absence. The phenomenon was common enough to have earned nicknames: the glitch effect, reality hiccups, and matrix moments. Some explanations felt more satisfying than others. Perhaps these incidents were the result of temporary blind spots in attention, the brain filtering out familiar objects in familiar locations as a way of conserving cognitive energy. Maybe stress or distraction created brief gaps in awareness, causing people to overlook items that were actually present all along. But Sarah knew what she had experienced. The wooden bowl had been empty, not just overlooked. She had touched its surface, felt its smooth interior, confirmed the absence of her keys through multiple senses. The explanation that felt most honest, even if it was the most unsettling, was that sometimes the boundaries between presence and absence, between here and not here, were more permeable than our everyday experience suggests. The incident changed something fundamental in how Sarah moved through the world. She became more attentive to the small details of her environment, more aware of the assumptions she made about how reality operates. She also became more accepting of mystery, more comfortable with the idea that some experiences resist easy explanation. Months later, when friends shared their own stories of disappearing objects, Sarah would listen with a knowing nod rather than skeptical dismissal. She had learned that the world was full of small impossibilities, tiny cracks in the facade of ordinary reality through which wonder and mystery could peek through. The keys still lived in their wooden bowl by the door, and Sarah still placed them there each evening with ritualistic precision. But now the routine carried an additional layer of meaning, not just organization, but a kind of gentle negotiation with a universe that had shown itself capable of playful mischief. 2. The sock that vanished from a closed drawer. Detective Michael Chen had spent 15 years investigating mysteries for a living, training his mind to notice inconsistencies, to follow evidence wherever it led, and to maintain healthy skepticism about extraordinary claims. His methodical approach to problem solving extended into every aspect of his life, from organizing case files to managing household tasks. This attention to detail made what happened with his sock drawer particularly unsettling, because it violated everything he thought he understood about how objects behave in controlled environments. It was a quiet Sunday evening in late October, the kind of peaceful domestic moment that provides welcome contrast to the chaos of police work. Michael was preparing for the week ahead, laying out clothes with the same systematic approach he used to organize evidence. He had just completed his laundry, folding each item with military precision before placing them in their designated locations. The socks in question were a distinctive pair, thick wool hiking socks with a burgundy and grey pattern that his sister had given him for Christmas 2 years earlier. They were among his favourites, valued both for their comfort during long shifts and their sentimental significance. As he sorted his clean laundry, he distinctly remembered folding the pair together and placing them in the front left section of his sock drawer, following his usual organization system. The next morning, as Michael prepared for what promised to be a challenging day of testimony in a high-profile case, he opened his sock drawer to retrieve the burgundy and grey pair. They weren't in their designated location. This wasn't unusual in itself. Even the most organized systems occasionally develop small disruptions. But as Michael searched through the entire drawer, systematically checking each pair of socks, the burgundy and grey ones were simply nowhere to be found. Drawing on his investigative training, Michael expanded his search methodically. He checked the laundry basket, thinking perhaps he had imagined putting them away. He examined the bedroom floor, the path from the laundry room, even inside the washing machine and dryer. His search was thorough and logical, covering every possible location where a pair of socks might reasonably end up. After 20 minutes of investigation, Michael was forced to conclude that one pair of socks had somehow vanished from a closed drawer in a locked apartment. The detective in him found this conclusion unacceptable, but the evidence was undeniable. 3 days later, as Michael was getting dressed for another early shift, he opened his sock drawer and froze. The burgundy and grey socks were back, folded together exactly as he always kept them, positioned in their usual spot in the front left section of the drawer. They appeared to be clean, showed no signs of having been worn, and felt exactly as they should, soft wool with the familiar texture he knew well. Michael stood in his bedroom, holding the socks and running through possible explanations with the same analytical approach he used for unsolved cases. Had he somehow overlooked them during his search? His training had taught him to be thorough, and he trusted his investigative skills. Could someone else have had access to his apartment? The locks were secure, and he lived alone with no spare keys distributed. Had he experienced some kind of temporary memory lapse? The possibility troubled him more than he wanted to admit. Over the following weeks, Michael found himself paying closer attention to the contents of his drawers and closets, conducting informal inventories with the same precision he brought to crime scenes. The burgundy and grey socks remained in their designated location, showing no signs of unusual behavior. But the experience had planted a seed of uncertainty about the stability of his controlled environment. He began researching similar experiences online, approaching the task with the same methodical curiosity he applied to cold cases. What he discovered was a surprisingly large community of people who had experienced vanishing and reappearing objects in their homes. The accounts shared common elements, items disappearing from secure locations, thorough searches yielding no results, and eventual reappearance in the original location after a period of several days. Some researchers suggested these experiences might be related to quantum mechanics, the strange behavior of particles at the subatomic level that allows for phenomena like superposition and quantum tunneling. Perhaps, some theorized, everyday objects occasionally exhibit quantum properties, existing in multiple states or locations simultaneously until observed and forced to choose a single state. Other explanations focused on the psychology of attention and memory. The human brain processes enormous amounts of sensory information every moment, filtering out redundant or familiar stimuli to prevent cognitive overload. Perhaps disappearing objects were simply experiencing temporary invisibility due to this filtering process, present but unnoticed, until some shift in attention brought them back into conscious awareness. Michael found both explanations intriguing, but incomplete. His training had taught him to trust empirical evidence over theoretical explanations, and the evidence in this case pointed to something that challenged conventional understanding of how objects behave in space and time. The incident also sparked broader reflections about the nature of certainty and investigation. As a detective, Michael's job was to construct coherent narratives from fragmented evidence, to build cases that could withstand scrutiny in court. But this personal experience reminded him that even the most careful observations might miss important aspects of reality, that the world might operate according to principles more complex and mysterious than those typically acknowledged in legal proceedings. Months later, when colleagues shared their own stories of unexplained domestic incidents, Michael found himself listening with professional interest rather than skeptical dismissal. His experience with the disappearing socks had taught him that mystery could exist even in the most controlled and familiar environments, that the boundary between the explicable and inexplicable might be more porous than his training had suggested. The burgundy and grey socks continued to serve their practical purpose, keeping his feet warm during long shifts and court appearances. But they also served as a reminder that the world was full of small mysteries, and that sometimes the most honest response to mystery was simply to acknowledge its existence rather than forcing premature closure through inadequate explanations. 3. The phone that teleported across the room. Digital forensics expert Dr. Amanda Foster lived at the intersection of technology and mystery, spending her days uncovering digital evidence that could solve crimes and resolve disputes. Her work required absolute precision and attention to detail, qualities that extended into her personal relationship with technology. Every device in her home had its designated charging station. Every cable was organized with obsessive care, and every electronic gadget operated according to predictable patterns that she understood intimately. This methodical approach to technology made the incident with her smartphone particularly jarring, because it violated fundamental principles about how objects move through space, especially objects that are powered off and sitting on a stable surface. It happened on a Thursday evening in January, during one of those peaceful domestic interludes that punctuate busy professional lives. Amanda was settling in for an evening of reading, having just finished updating her work laptop and organizing the cables in her home office. Her smartphone, a device she used primarily for personal communication and photography, was resting on the wooden nightstand beside her bed, connected to its charging cable and displaying the steady green light that indicated a full battery. The phone was positioned exactly where she always placed it, parallel to the edge of the nightstand, about 6 inches from the lamp, with the charging cable neatly coiled to prevent tangling. Amanda was particular about this placement because the nightstand's surface was small, and precise positioning prevented the device from accidentally falling to the floor during the night. After completing her evening routine, Amanda settled into bed with a novel she'd been meaning to finish. The bedroom was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional sound of cars passing on the street below. Her phone remained on the nightstand, occasionally lighting up briefly to display notifications before returning to its dormant state. Around 10:30, as Amanda was reaching the climax of a particularly engaging chapter, she became aware of a soft thudding sound from across the room. It was the kind of noise that might be made by a small object falling onto carpet, distinctive enough to break her concentration, but not alarming enough to suggest anything serious. She glanced around the room, scanning for anything that might have fallen from a shelf or dresser. Everything appeared to be in its proper place. She was about to return to her reading when something caught her attention on the floor near her closet, approximately 8 feet from her bed. Her smartphone was lying on the carpet, screen down, with its charging cable trailing behind it like a technological tail. The cable was still plugged into the wall outlet beside her nightstand, stretched to its full length across the room. Amanda stared at the scene for several long moments, her analytically trained mind working to process what she was seeing. The charging cable was not long enough to reach the location where her phone now rested. Even if the device had somehow slid off the nightstand, which seemed impossible given its stable placement, it could not have traveled 8 feet across the room while remaining connected to a cable that measured only 4 feet in length. She got out of bed and walked to where her phone lay on the carpet. The device appeared undamaged, its screen intact and responsive when she picked it up. The charging cable showed no signs of strain or damage, despite having somehow stretched beyond its physical capabilities. When she held the phone at the location where she found it, the cable was taut, pulled to its absolute maximum length, with no slack remaining. Amanda retraced the theoretical path from nightstand to carpet, trying to construct a plausible sequence of events. Perhaps the phone had bounced off the nightstand at an unusual angle. But the trajectory required to reach its final location defied the laws of physics, requiring the device to change direction mid-flight and somehow travel horizontally across the room. Could someone else have moved it? Amanda lived alone, and her apartment was secured with deadbolts and a security system. No one else had access, and she had been awake and alert in the same room where the incident occurred. The idea of an intruder seemed both impossible and absurdly focused on phone relocation. As someone who specialized in digital forensics, Amanda was accustomed to examining evidence with microscopic precision. She spent the next 30 minutes documenting the scene with the same thoroughness she brought to crime scenes, taking photographs from multiple angles, measuring distances, and noting the exact position of every relevant object. The evidence was internally consistent, but collectively impossible. The phone's final location, the cable's length, and the absence of any intermediate disturbance created a puzzle that resisted conventional explanation. Amanda found herself in the strange position of having clear evidence for an event that shouldn't have been able to occur. Over the following days, she researched similar experiences, approaching the task with scientific curiosity rather than skeptical dismissal. Online forums contained dozens of accounts from people who had experienced teleporting objects, items that moved from one location to another without passing through the intervening space, often in ways that defied physical constraints. Some explanations drew from quantum mechanics, suggesting that everyday objects might occasionally exhibit properties typically reserved for subatomic particles. Quantum tunneling, for example, allows particles to pass through barriers that should be impermeable according to classical physics. Perhaps, some theorized, macroscopic objects occasionally experienced similar phenomena, temporarily existing in multiple locations before collapsing into a single position. Other theories focused on consciousness and observation, drawing from experiments in quantum physics that suggested the act of measurement could influence the behavior of quantum systems. Maybe the boundary between observer and observed was more fluid than typically assumed, allowing focused attention to occasionally influence the physical world in unexpected ways. Amanda found these explanations intellectually stimulating, but ultimately unsatisfying. Her training had taught her to rely on reproducible evidence and testable hypotheses. The teleporting phone incident remained unique and unrepeatable, resistant to the kind of systematic investigation that characterized her professional work. But the experience did change her relationship with certainty and mystery. As someone who spent her career uncovering hidden truth through technological analysis, Amanda had developed confidence in her ability to understand complex systems. The phone incident reminded her that understanding might always be provisional, that even the most familiar technologies might occasionally behave in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. Months later, when the phone was eventually replaced by a newer model, Amanda kept the old device as an unusual memento. It served as a reminder that the world contained mysteries that resisted easy categorization, small impossibilities that coexisted peacefully with everyday life, waiting to surprise anyone who paid close enough attention. 4. The Mandela Effect Mystery. Dr. Rebecca Thompson had built her career on the reliability of human memory, spending 2 decades as a cognitive psychologist researching how people form, store, and retrieve memories. Her work had contributed to understanding everything from eyewitness testimony to therapeutic approaches for trauma recovery. She knew better than most people how malleable and unreliable memory could be, how easily false memories could be implanted, and how confidently people could recall events that never actually occurred. This expertise made her personal encounter with the Mandela effect particularly unsettling, because it challenged not just individual memory, but collective memory, suggesting that large groups of people could share detailed false memories about historical events and cultural artifacts. The realization began during a casual conversation at a faculty dinner party in late November. Dr. Thompson was discussing childhood memories with colleagues when someone mentioned the beloved series of children's books about a family of bears. Without hesitation, she began reminiscing about the Berenstain Bears, pronouncing the name with the distinctive steen sound that she remembered from countless bedtime stories during her own childhood, and later with her children. Actually, interrupted Dr. James Martinez from the history department, it's pronounced Berenstain, with an stain ending. It's spelled B-E-R-E-N-S-T-A-I-N. Bernstein. Rebecca paused mid-sentence, certain that her colleague was mistaken. She had vivid memories of reading these books dozens of times, of carefully sounding out the family name for her young children, of seeing the distinctive cursive font on book covers that clearly spelled Berenstein with an EIN ending. The pronunciation Berenstain sounded completely foreign to her, despite Dr. Martinez's confidence. "I think you might be misremembering," she said gently, drawing on her professional expertise about memory errors. "I'm quite certain it's Berenstein with an E." The conversation that followed revealed something extraordinary and troubling. Of the 8 people at the dinner table, 5 distinctly remembered Berenstein, while 3 insisted it had always been Berenstain. Both groups were confident in their memories, both could describe specific details about the books, and both seemed genuinely surprised by the alternative spelling. Driven by scientific curiosity, Rebecca decided to investigate. The next morning, she visited her local bookstore and pulled several Berenstain Bears books from the children's section. The covers clearly displayed Berenstain with an AIN ending. She purchased one of the books and examined it closely at home, studying the font, the copyright information, and the author credits. All evidence confirmed the Berenstain spelling. But Rebecca's memory remained stubbornly convinced that she had spent years of her life reading about the Berenstain Bears. She could visualize the book covers with perfect clarity, complete with the specific way the cursive E connected to the I in the family name. The memory felt as solid and reliable as any other childhood recollection. Intrigued and somewhat disturbed by this discrepancy, Rebecca began researching what she discovered was called the Mandela effect. Named after the widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s, when he had actually died in 2013 after serving as South Africa's president. Online forums were filled with people sharing similar experiences of collective false memories about everything from movie quotes to corporate logos to historical events. The examples were remarkably specific and consistent. Thousands of people remembered the evil queen in Snow White saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall," when the actual line was "Magic mirror on the wall." Many recalled a movie called Shazam, starring comedian Sinbad as a genie, despite no such movie ever existing. Others insisted that the Monopoly Man wore a monocle, that Kit Kat was hyphenated, or that the Fruit of the Loom logo included a cornucopia. What struck Rebecca most powerfully was the consistency of these false memories across large populations. Individual memory errors were common and well documented in psychological research, but collective false memories shared by thousands of people suggested something more complex and mysterious. As a researcher, she was familiar with various explanations for memory distortions. Confabulation could fill gaps in memory with plausible but false information. Social contagion could spread false memories through communities. Confirmation bias could strengthen confidence in incorrect recollections by filtering out contradictory evidence. But these explanations felt inadequate to account for the scale and specificity of Mandela effect phenomena. Why would thousands of people independently develop the same false memory about the Berenstain Bears spelling? Why would the false memories often seem more vivid and detailed than accurate memories of the same events? Some researchers proposed more exotic explanations. Perhaps the Mandela effect provided evidence for parallel universes or alternate timelines, with some people retaining memories from different versions of reality. Maybe consciousness occasionally slipped between similar but distinct universes, carrying memories that didn't match the current timeline's history. Other theories suggested that reality itself might be more fluid than commonly assumed, with the past occasionally shifting in subtle ways that left some people with memories of earlier versions of events. These ideas drew from quantum mechanics and theories about the nature of time and causality that challenged conventional understanding of linear progression. Rebecca approached these explanations with the skepticism her training demanded, but she couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of her own experience. Her memory of Berenstain Bears remained vivid and detailed months after discovering the correct spelling. She could still visualize the book covers with perfect clarity, still hear herself pronouncing the name with confidence, still remember the surprise on her children's faces when she first introduced them to the Bear family. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to memory research. While she continued to study individual memory processes, she also began investigating collective memory phenomena, exploring how groups of people could share false memories, and what these experiences might reveal about the nature of reality and consciousness. Perhaps most significantly, the Mandela effect taught Rebecca to hold her certainties more lightly. As someone who had spent her career studying the unreliability of human memory, she thought she understood its limitations. But experiencing collective false memory firsthand revealed new dimensions of uncertainty, suggesting that even well-documented facts might be more provisional than previously assumed. The Berenstain Bears books still sat on the shelf in her home office, a reminder that the world might be stranger and more malleable than scientific training typically acknowledges. They served as physical evidence that reality and memory could diverge in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about how the world operates, opening spaces for mystery and wonder in even the most carefully studied phenomena. 5. The Berenstain versus Berenstein paradox. Elementary school librarian Margaret Walsh had always taken pride in her encyclopedic knowledge of children's literature. After 32 years of helping young readers discover the magic of books, she could recite publication dates, summarize plots, and recommend perfect titles for every reading level and interest. Her memory for details was legendary among colleagues and parents, earning her a reputation as the person to consult for any question about children's books. This expertise made her encounter with the Berenstain Bears paradox particularly disorienting, because it challenged not just her memory, but her professional identity as someone who knew children's literature with absolute certainty. The confusion began on a busy Tuesday morning in March, during the weekly book return processing that marked the rhythm of her professional life. Margaret was scanning returned books back into the library system when she noticed something that made her pause mid-motion. A well-worn copy of The Berenstain Bears and the Messy Room was sitting in her hands, but something about the title looked wrong. The family name on the cover was spelled Berenstain with an A-I-N ending, but Margaret's memory insisted it should be Berenstein with an E-I-N ending. She had been checking these books in and out for decades, had recommended them to thousands of families, had shelved them in alphabetical order countless times. The Berenstein spelling felt as familiar and certain as her own name. Initially, Margaret assumed she was looking at a misprint, or perhaps a knockoff edition. Publishing errors happened occasionally, and sometimes unauthorized versions of popular books appeared with slightly altered details. She set the book aside and continued processing returns, planning to investigate the anomaly when she had more time. But as the morning progressed, Margaret encountered more books from the series, and every single one displayed the same Berenstain spelling. She pulled additional copies from the shelves, examining copyright pages and publisher information with growing bewilderment. All evidence confirmed that the Bear family had always been named Berenstain, but her memory remained stubbornly convinced otherwise. During her lunch break, Margaret decided to research the issue systematically. She accessed the library's catalog system and searched for every book in the series. The computer records showed consistent Berenstain spelling throughout the entire catalog, dating back to the library's earliest acquisitions in the 1970s. Order histories, processing records, and circulation data all confirmed the AIN spelling, with no indication that it had ever been different. Growing increasingly puzzled, Margaret began asking colleagues about their memories of the series. The responses revealed a fascinating divide. About half of the staff distinctly remembered Berenstein with an E, while the others were equally certain it had always been Berenstain with an A. Both groups were confident in their recollections. Both could describe specific memories of reading or recommending the books, and both seemed genuinely surprised by the alternative spelling. The divide didn't follow predictable patterns. Age, education level, years of library experience, and personal reading habits showed no correlation with which spelling people remembered. The phenomenon seemed to cut across demographics randomly, creating two populations with equally vivid but contradictory memories of the same cultural artifact. Intrigued by this mystery, Margaret began documenting similar cases among library patrons. When parents arrived to check out Berenstain Bears books, she would casually ask about their memories of the series from their own childhoods. The results were remarkably consistent with what she had observed among staff. Roughly half remembered each spelling, with both groups expressing confusion and sometimes mild distress when confronted with evidence that contradicted their memories. Children, interestingly, showed no such confusion. Young readers who encountered the books for the first time accepted the Berenstain spelling without question, suggesting that the memory discrepancy was specific to people who had formed childhood memories of the series before a certain point in time. Margaret's investigation led her to online communities devoted to discussing what researchers had termed the Mandela effect, collective false memories shared by large populations. The Berenstain paradox was one of the most commonly reported examples, with thousands of people worldwide reporting identical false memories of the EIN spelling. The consistency of these false memories was remarkable. People didn't just vaguely recall a different spelling. They remembered specific details about how the cursive E connected to the I, how they taught their children to pronounce the name, and how surprised they were when characters in the books mispronounced their own family name. The false memories were often more vivid and emotionally resonant than accurate memories of other childhood books. Various explanations were proposed for this phenomenon. Some psychologists suggested that the Berenstain spelling might feel more familiar because it follows common patterns in Jewish surnames, making it easier for people to remember incorrectly. Others pointed to the fact that many surnames ending in Estein are pronounced with a long I sound, potentially creating confusion about the spelling. But these explanations felt inadequate to account for the scale and specificity of the phenomenon. Why would thousands of people independently develop the same false memory? Why would the false spelling feel more natural and familiar than the actual spelling, even when confronted with physical evidence? More exotic theories suggested that the Mandela effect might provide evidence for parallel universes or timeline shifts, with some people retaining memories from alternate versions of reality where the bears were indeed named Berenstain. These ideas challenged conventional understanding of memory and reality, suggesting that the past might be more fluid than typically assumed. Margaret found herself caught between her professional skepticism and her personal experience of vivid false memory. Her training had taught her to trust documented evidence over personal recollection, but her memory of Berenstain Bears remained stubbornly persistent, even months after discovering the correct spelling. The paradox fundamentally changed her approach to certainty and knowledge. As a librarian, she had always taken pride in providing accurate information and helping people distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources. But her experience with the Berenstain Bears taught her that even the most confident memories could be incorrect, and that collective certainty was no guarantee of accuracy. Perhaps most significantly, the experience opened her mind to the possibility that reality itself might be more complex and mysterious than her professional training had suggested. The books on her shelves remained the same. Well-loved stories about a bear family learning important life lessons. But they also served as reminders that the world contained mysteries that resisted easy explanation, small impossibilities that challenged assumptions about memory, reality, and the nature of shared human experience. The Berenstain Bears continued to circulate among young readers, carrying their timeless lessons about friendship, responsibility, and family values. But for Margaret and many others who had experienced the spelling paradox, they also carried deeper questions about the reliability of memory and the strange ways that collective consciousness could diverge from documented reality, creating spaces where mystery and wonder could flourish even in the most familiar corners of everyday life. 6. The movie that never existed. Film studies professor Dr. Elena Rodriguez had devoted her academic career to analyzing the cultural impact of 1990s children's entertainment, with particular expertise in family comedies and their influence on popular culture. Her research library contained extensive documentation of the decade's film output, including comprehensive databases of theatrical releases, made-for-TV movies, and direct-to-video productions. This exhaustive knowledge of 90s cinema made her encounter with the mythical Shazam movie particularly fascinating and troubling. The mystery began during a graduate seminar focused on wish fulfillment themes in 1990s children's films. Dr. Rodriguez was leading a discussion about genie movies when one of her most diligent students, Marcus, raised his hand with what seemed like a straightforward question. Professor, why didn't you include Sinbad's genie movie in our viewing list? I remember watching Shazam as a kid and thinking it was really funny. Elena paused, searching her memory for any film matching that description. She was familiar with Sinbad's filmography from the 1990s, which included First Kid, Jingle All the Way, and Good Burger. But she had no recollection of him ever playing a genie character. The title, Shazam, was familiar as the magic word associated with the superhero formerly known as Captain Marvel, but she couldn't connect it to any Sinbad vehicle. "I'm not familiar with that film," she replied carefully. "Can you tell me more about what you remember?" Marcus's description was remarkably detailed. He recalled Sinbad playing a genie who emerged from a lamp to help two children, possibly siblings, navigate some kind of family crisis. The movie featured typical 90s production values, with Sinbad wearing colorful genie costumes and using physical comedy to generate laughs. Marcus remembered specific scenes, including one where the genie struggled to fit through a doorway, and another involving magic gone comically wrong in a kitchen. Other students in the seminar began nodding in recognition, adding their own memories of the supposed film. Sarah remembered the movie being aired frequently on family-friendly cable channels. David recalled his younger sister having a crush on one of the child actors. Jennifer mentioned borrowing the VHS from a video rental store. Elena found herself in the peculiar position of having multiple students describe detailed memories of a film that, according to her extensive research and documentation, had never existed. She promised to investigate and include the film in future discussions if she could locate it. That evening, Dr. Rodriguez began a systematic search through her research databases. She checked film industry publications, box office records, and video release catalogs. She examined Sinbad's complete filmography, television appearances, and even his stand-up comedy specials. No evidence existed for any project matching the students' descriptions. Expanding her search, Elena contacted colleagues at other universities, reached out to film industry archives, and even attempted to contact Sinbad's representatives. The response was universally consistent. No such movie had ever been produced, distributed, or aired. Several colleagues mentioned receiving similar inquiries from students and researchers, all looking for the same non-existent film. The mystery deepened when Elena discovered online communities devoted to discussing the Shazam phenomenon. Thousands of people shared vivid memories of watching the movie, describing consistent details about plot, characters, and specific scenes. The collective memory was remarkably coherent, with most people recalling the film as a mid-90s production that aired regularly on television throughout their childhoods. Attempts to explain the phenomenon focused on potential confusion with other films. Kazam, a 1996 movie starring Shaquille O'Neal as a genie, was often cited as the source of false memories. But people who remembered Shazam insisted it was completely different from Kazam, describing distinct plot elements, different visual styles, and specifically remembering Sinbad's comedic performance. Some researchers suggested that collective false memory might result from the brain's tendency to fill gaps in recollection with plausible information. Perhaps people remembered fragments of various 90s comedies, Sinbad's performances in other films, genie themes from movies like Aladdin, and typical family comedy tropes, and unconsciously assembled these elements into a coherent but fictional memory. But this explanation struggled to account for the consistency and detail of the false memories. Why would thousands of people independently create the same fictional movie, complete with specific plot points, character interactions, and even remembered emotional responses to particular scenes? Dr. Rodriguez found herself documenting what appeared to be a collective cultural hallucination. The Shazam movie existed in the shared memory of a generation, but had left no trace in the documented record of film history. It was a ghost in the machine of popular culture, a film that felt completely real to those who remembered it, but had somehow failed to exist in any verifiable form. In her research, Elena discovered that Sinbad himself had addressed the phenomenon in interviews and social media posts. The comedian seemed genuinely bewildered by the widespread belief in his genie movie, often joking about receiving royalty checks for a film he never made. He had even participated in April Fool's pranks, creating fake movie posters, and behind-the-scenes photos to playfully acknowledge the persistent myth. The consistency of the false memories was particularly striking when Elena began conducting structured interviews with people who remembered the film. Subjects could describe not just plot elements, but specific emotional responses, laughing at particular jokes, feeling tension during conflict scenes, and experiencing satisfaction at the story's resolution. These weren't vague recollections, but detailed multisensory memories that included visual, auditory, and emotional components. One interview subject, a marketing executive named David, described watching the movie during a family vacation when he was 8 years old. He remembered the hotel room, the feeling of excitement about finding a good movie on television, and his parents' laughter during the comedy sequences. The memory was embedded in a web of contextual details that made it feel absolutely authentic, despite the film's non-existence. Elena began exploring psychological research on false memory implantation, studying how detailed fictional memories could be created through suggestion, repetition, and social reinforcement. Laboratory studies had demonstrated that people could develop vivid memories of events that never occurred, complete with sensory details and emotional responses. But these studies typically involved individual subjects and carefully controlled conditions, not spontaneous collective false memories shared by thousands of people. The Shazam phenomenon also raised questions about the nature of cultural memory and shared experience. Movies and television shows serve as common reference points that help define generational identity, providing shared vocabulary and emotional touchstones that bind communities together. The fact that a non-existent film could serve this function suggested that cultural memory might be more fluid and collaborative than typically assumed. Some theories proposed that the Shazam movie might have existed in early development stages, with promotional materials or test footage creating awareness that was later transformed into false memories when the project was cancelled. But industry records showed no evidence of such development, and no promotional materials or production stills had ever surfaced, despite intensive searching by curious researchers and dedicated fans. More speculative explanations drew from theories about parallel universes and alternate timelines. Perhaps the Shazam movie existed in a different version of reality, with some people retaining memories from a timeline where the film was actually produced and released. These ideas challenge conventional understanding of memory and reality, suggesting that consciousness might occasionally access information from alternate versions of history. Elena approached these explanations with academic skepticism, but she couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of the phenomenon she was documenting. Her expertise in 1990s cinema had always felt comprehensive and authoritative, but the Shazam mystery revealed gaps in understanding that extended beyond simple missing information to questions about the nature of reality and memory itself. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to cultural studies and historical documentation. While she continued to rely on verifiable evidence and documented sources, she also began paying attention to collective memory phenomena that resisted traditional archival methods. The absence of evidence, she realized, could sometimes be as significant as its presence. Perhaps most importantly, the Shazam mystery taught Elena to remain humble about the boundaries of knowledge and certainty. In a field where comprehensive documentation was typically possible, she had encountered a cultural artifact that existed only in collective memory, challenging assumptions about how shared experiences form and persist across communities. The non-existent movie continued to live in the memories of those who had experienced it, serving as a reminder that reality might be more complex and collaborative than academic training typically acknowledged. It existed in a liminal space between fact and fiction, between documented history and lived experience, opening new questions about how culture creates meaning and how communities share understanding of their common past. 7. The frozen bird in the sky. Ornithologist Dr. James Crawford had spent 25 years studying bird behavior and migration patterns, developing an eye for the subtle details of avian flight that escaped casual observation. His work required precise attention to movement patterns, wing positioning, and flight dynamics, skills that made him an expert observer of aerial phenomena. This expertise made his encounter with a motionless bird particularly unsettling, because it violated fundamental principles of aerodynamics and animal behavior. The incident occurred on a crisp October morning during Dr. Crawford's weekly bird count in Riverside Park, a routine that combined professional research with personal enjoyment. He was positioned near the pond, using high-powered binoculars to observe waterfowl behavior, when something in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Approximately 40 feet above the tree line, a red-tailed hawk appeared to be suspended in mid-air, without any visible means of support. The bird wasn't hovering in the typical fashion of raptors hunting prey. There was no wing movement, no adjustment of tail feathers, no micro-corrections for wind resistance. It simply hung motionless against the blue sky, as if someone had paused a nature documentary at a random frame. Dr. Crawford adjusted his binoculars and focused on the stationary bird, expecting to observe some unusual but explicable behavior. Perhaps the hawk was riding in thermal updraft so perfectly balanced that minimal wing movement was required for stabilization. But as he watched, the bird remained absolutely motionless for what felt like an impossibly long duration. The hawk's wings were partially extended in a natural flight position, neither fully spread for gliding nor folded for diving. Its head was turned slightly to the left, beak partially open, eyes focused on something below. Every detail of the bird's posture suggested normal flight behavior, except for the complete absence of any movement whatsoever. Dr. Crawford began timing the phenomenon, using his field watch to track the duration of the bird's motionlessness. 30 seconds passed, then a full minute, then 2 minutes. No living bird could maintain flight without some form of wing movement for such an extended period. The laws of physics simply didn't permit stationary flight without mechanical assistance or extraordinary wind conditions. But the morning air was relatively calm, with only gentle breezes that should have required constant micro-adjustments from any flying creature. Dr. Crawford could see leaves rustling in nearby trees, indicating normal air movement that should have affected the suspended hawk's position. Yet the bird remained perfectly still, defying both aerodynamics and animal behavior. After approximately 3 minutes of motionless suspension, the hawk suddenly resumed normal flight with no apparent transition period. There was no gradual acceleration, no adjustment of wing position, no recognition that anything unusual had occurred. The bird simply continued flying, as if the preceding minutes of impossible stillness had never happened. Dr. Crawford watched the hawk disappear into the distance, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. His professional training provided no framework for understanding stationary flight in large birds. Hummingbirds could hover through rapid wing movement, but they still exhibited constant motion. Some insects could appear nearly motionless while maintaining flight, but they were operating at scales where different aerodynamic principles applied. In the days following the incident, Dr. Crawford researched every possible explanation for the phenomenon. He consulted atmospheric science colleagues about unusual wind conditions that might create perfect lift without requiring wing movement. He investigated optical illusions that might make moving objects appear stationary from certain viewing angles. He even explored the possibility that he had experienced a brief neurological episode that affected time perception. None of these explanations felt adequate to account for what he had observed. The hawk had been clearly visible against an unobstructed sky, with reference points from surrounding trees that confirmed its absolute stillness. Weather data for that morning showed normal atmospheric conditions, with no unusual wind patterns or thermal activity that could explain the bird's behavior. Online research revealed that Dr. Crawford's experience wasn't entirely unique. Forums and social media contained scattered reports from other observers who had witnessed birds appearing to freeze in mid-flight. The accounts were remarkably consistent. Birds of various species suspended motionlessly for minutes at a time before resuming normal flight without apparent transition. Some explanations focused on time perception and consciousness. Perhaps the observers had experienced brief alterations in subjective time, making normal bird flight appear frozen due to changes in neural processing speed. This theory suggested that the phenomenon might be more about human perception than animal behavior, with consciousness occasionally operating at different temporal scales. Other theories explored the possibility that birds might occasionally enter states of perfect aerodynamic balance, finding pockets of air that provided lift without requiring active flight effort. While this seemed physically unlikely for extended periods, it offered a naturalistic explanation that didn't require challenging fundamental understanding of flight mechanics. More speculative explanations suggested that the frozen bird phenomenon might represent glitches in the fabric of reality itself, moments when the normal flow of time and space experienced temporary interruptions. These ideas drew from quantum mechanics and theories about the discontinuous nature of spacetime at microscopic scales, proposing that similar discontinuities might occasionally manifest at macroscopic levels. Dr. Crawford found himself caught between scientific skepticism and the undeniable evidence of his own carefully trained observations. His expertise in avian behavior made him confident that what he had witnessed was genuinely anomalous, but his scientific training demanded explanations that fit within established paradigms of understanding. The experience fundamentally changed his approach to field observation and research. While he continued to study bird behavior through conventional methods, he also began paying attention to anomalous phenomena that didn't fit standard categories. He started carrying additional documentation equipment and developed protocols for recording unusual observations that might not meet traditional standards of scientific evidence. Perhaps most significantly, the frozen hawk taught Dr. Crawford to remain open to mystery within his field of expertise. Science, he realized, was built on the assumption that natural phenomena followed consistent, discoverable patterns. But his encounter with the motionless bird suggested that nature might occasionally operate according to principles that hadn't yet been identified or understood. The hawk itself had disappeared into the vast complexity of the ecosystem, probably unaware that its behavior had challenged a scientist's understanding of physical reality. But the memory of those impossible minutes remained vivid in Dr. Crawford's mind, serving as a reminder that the natural world contained mysteries that resisted easy categorization, moments when the boundary between the possible and impossible became surprisingly permeable. In subsequent fieldwork, Dr. Crawford found himself watching the sky with renewed attention, alert to the possibility that nature might again reveal behaviors that challenged conventional understanding. The frozen bird had opened a door to questions about time, space, and consciousness that extended far beyond ornithology, suggesting that even the most carefully studied phenomena might contain depths of mystery that had yet to be explored. 8. The insect that hovered without wings. Entomologist Dr. Sarah Kim had dedicated her career to understanding the intricate mechanics of insect flight, specializing in the complex aerodynamics that allowed creatures weighing mere grams to perform aerial maneuvers that challenged human engineering capabilities. Her laboratory was equipped with high-speed cameras capable of capturing wing movements measured in milliseconds, and her research had contributed to advances in biomimetic robotics and micro-aircraft design. This deep understanding of insect flight mechanics made her encounter with a wingless hovering insect particularly baffling. The incident occurred during a routine field study in the university's botanical garden, where Dr. Kim was documenting pollinator behavior among late-season flowering plants. She was positioned near a patch of autumn asters, using a combination of direct observation and high-resolution photography to catalog the insects visiting these crucial late-season nectar sources. The morning was perfect for fieldwork: calm air, warm sunshine, and abundant insect activity that provided rich material for her ongoing research into pollinator efficiency and plant-insect interactions. Dr. Kim was focused on photographing a particularly busy cluster of flowers when something in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Approximately 3 feet to her left, hovering at eye level near a group of purple asters, was what appeared to be a small beetle or similar insect. The creature was maintaining a stable position about 6 inches from the flowers, neither approaching to feed nor moving away to explore other options. This hovering behavior wasn't unusual in itself. Many insects exhibited complex flight patterns while evaluating potential food sources. What captured Dr. Kim's attention was the complete absence of visible wings on the hovering insect. She carefully adjusted her position to get a clearer view, using the slow, deliberate movements that her field experience had taught her were essential for avoiding disturbance to insect behavior. Through her magnifying glass, the creature became clearly visible. A dark, oval-shaped insect roughly half an inch in length, with the general body structure of a beetle, but lacking any visible wing cases or extended wings. The insect continued hovering with remarkable stability, maintaining its position despite gentle air currents that were moving nearby flower petals and grass blades. Dr. Kim could see no evidence of wing movement, no blur of rapidly beating appendages, no wing cases that might be concealing functional flight surfaces. The creature simply floated in mid-air as if supported by some invisible mechanism. Dr. Kim began photographing the phenomenon, using her camera's macro capabilities to capture detailed images, while the insect remained motionless in its hovering position. The high-resolution images confirmed what her direct observation had suggested. This was indeed a beetle-like insect maintaining stable flight without any visible means of aerodynamic support. For nearly 4 minutes, the creature remained suspended in the same position, occasionally rotating slightly, but never deviating from its chosen altitude or moving significantly in any horizontal direction. Dr. Kim was able to observe and photograph the insect from multiple angles, confirming that no hidden wings or other flight structures were enabling this impossible behavior. The hovering finally ended when the insect simply vanished. There was no gradual movement away, no sudden flight in any particular direction, no visible landing on nearby vegetation. One moment the creature was clearly visible in its hovering position, and the next moment it was simply gone, leaving Dr. Kim staring at empty air with her camera still focused on the location where the insect had been suspended. In the days following this encounter, Dr. Kim conducted extensive research into possible explanations for wingless flight in insects. She consulted colleagues specializing in various insect orders, reviewed literature on unusual flight mechanisms, and even explored research into magnetic field sensitivity in arthropods. No known insect species could achieve sustained hovering flight without wings or other visible aerodynamic structures. Some insects, particularly certain beetles, could glide short distances using their body shape and posture to create limited lift. But gliding required initial altitude and resulted in predictable descent patterns. It couldn't explain sustained hovering at a fixed position. Other insects used specialized structures like enlarged legs or modified body segments to enhance their flight capabilities, but these features would have been clearly visible during Dr. Kim's detailed observation. The possibility of optical illusion or misidentification seemed unlikely given the duration and clarity of the observation. Dr. Kim had spent thousands of hours observing insect behavior and was familiar with the full range of flight capabilities across different species. The creature she had witnessed was clearly maintaining active flight control, adjusting its position in response to air currents in ways that required ongoing aerodynamic input. Research into magnetic field effects revealed that some insects could sense Earth's magnetic field for navigation purposes, but there was no evidence that magnetic sensitivity could provide sufficient force for flight support. The magnetic fields generated by typical insects were far too weak to overcome gravitational forces, and the hovering behavior had occurred in an area with no unusual magnetic sources. Dr. Kim also investigated the possibility that she had witnessed a previously unknown species or an insect exhibiting extremely rare behavior. While new species were still being discovered regularly, particularly among smaller arthropods, the fundamental mechanics of insect flight were well understood. Wings or other aerodynamic structures were necessary for sustained flight across all known insect orders. Online research revealed scattered reports of similar phenomena from other observers, including both amateur naturalists and professional biologists. The accounts shared common elements: small insects hovering without visible wings, stable flight that lasted for several minutes, and sudden disappearances that left no trace of where the creatures had gone. Some explanations focused on quantum mechanics and the possibility that macroscopic objects might occasionally exhibit quantum properties typically reserved for subatomic particles. Perhaps the hovering insect had achieved a state where classical physics temporarily gave way to quantum effects, allowing flight without conventional aerodynamic support. Other theories suggested that the phenomenon might represent encounters with unknown life forms that operated according to different biological principles than terrestrial insects. While this explanation seemed highly speculative, it offered one possible account for behavior that violated understood principles of aerodynamics and animal physiology. Dr. Kim approached these theories with scientific caution, but she couldn't dismiss the clear evidence of her own observations. Her expertise in insect flight made her confident that what she had witnessed was genuinely anomalous, representing behavior that fell outside established understanding of arthropod capabilities. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to field research and scientific observation. While she continued to study insect flight through conventional methods, she also began documenting anomalous phenomena that didn't fit existing categories of understanding. She developed protocols for recording unusual observations and started collaborating with colleagues interested in exploring the boundaries of biological knowledge. Perhaps most importantly, the wingless hovering insect taught Dr. Kim to remain open to mystery within her area of expertise. Science progressed through careful observation and hypothesis testing, but it also required willingness to acknowledge phenomena that challenged existing paradigms. Her encounter with the impossible insect served as a reminder that nature might contain principles and capabilities that hadn't yet been discovered or understood. The botanical garden continued to serve as a site for conventional research into pollinator behavior and plant-insect interactions. But for Dr. Kim, it had also become a place where the impossible could briefly manifest, where the boundaries between known and unknown became permeable, opening spaces for wonder and mystery within the most carefully studied aspects of the natural world. 9. The street that disappeared overnight. Urban planner Marcus Johnson had lived in the same neighborhood for 8 years, walking the same route to work every morning, with the kind of automatic familiarity that comes from thousands of repetitions. His daily commute took him through a grid of residential streets that he knew as intimately as the layout of his own apartment. Every corner store, every architectural detail, every traffic pattern mapped with unconscious precision in his spatial memory. This intimate knowledge of his neighborhood made the disappearance of Elm Street particularly disturbing, because it challenged not just his memory, but his professional understanding of how urban infrastructure operates and persists over time. The realization began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in September. Marcus was following his usual route to the bus stop, walking north on Maple Avenue toward the intersection where Elm Street branched off to the east. He had used this intersection as a landmark for years, turning left on Elm to reach the coffee shop that marked the halfway point of his commute. But when Marcus reached the intersection, Elm Street wasn't there. Where the familiar cross street should have been, Maple Avenue continued uninterrupted northward, with no break in the sidewalk, no street signs, no evidence that a cross street had ever existed. The space where Elm Street should have intersected was occupied by a small triangular park that Marcus had never seen before, complete with mature trees, established pathways, and a weathered bronze plaque commemorating its dedication in 1987. Marcus stood at what should have been the intersection, trying to reconcile his spatial memory with the physical evidence before him. He distinctly remembered Elm Street, a quiet residential block lined with modest single-family homes, anchored by Mrs. Patterson's corner house with its distinctive blue shutters and overgrown rose garden. The coffee shop, Beans and More, had occupied a converted craftsman bungalow about halfway down the block, its hand-painted sign and mismatched patio furniture creating a bohemian atmosphere that complemented the neighborhood's character. But according to the current layout, none of these landmarks had ever existed. Marcus pulled out his smartphone and opened his map application, expecting to find digital confirmation of Elm Street's existence. The map showed his current location at the intersection of Maple Avenue and the small triangular park, with no indication that another street had ever crossed at this point. The park appeared on satellite imagery as an established landscape feature, surrounded by buildings that backed up directly to its borders with no space for the missing street. Growing increasingly confused, Marcus decided to explore the surrounding blocks to reorient himself. Perhaps he had somehow become turned around, confusing one intersection with another in a neighborhood that contained several similar cross streets. But as he walked the surrounding area, every other street appeared exactly as he remembered. Same buildings, same businesses, same spatial relationships. Only Elm Street had vanished. During his lunch break, Marcus returned to investigate more thoroughly. He walked the entire perimeter of where Elm Street should have been located, examining the buildings that now backed up directly to each other with no intervening space. The architecture was consistent and weathered, showing no signs of recent construction or modification. Property lines aligned naturally, with mature landscaping and established infrastructure that suggested decades of stable configuration. Marcus also visited the city planning office, using his professional credentials to access municipal records and zoning maps. Every document he examined showed the same layout. Maple Avenue intersecting with the small triangular park, with no record of Elm Street ever existing in that location. Building permits, utility installation records, and tax assessments all confirmed a neighborhood configuration that had been stable for decades. The most disturbing discovery came when Marcus searched through his own photograph collection on his phone and computer. He had occasionally photographed interesting architectural details and neighborhood scenes during his morning walks, building an informal visual record of the area around his home. But when he scrolled through months of images, he found no photographs of Elm Street, Mrs. Patterson's house, or the Beans and More coffee shop. Yet his memory of these places remained vivid and detailed. He could visualize the interior of the coffee shop, exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, the way morning sunlight streamed through tall windows onto worn wooden floors. He remembered conversations with Mrs. Patterson about her garden, the specific location of the loose sidewalk stone near the bus stop, even the smell of coffee and pastries that drifted from the shop's open door during warm weather. Marcus began documenting his experience, approaching the mystery with the same systematic methods he used in urban planning projects. He interviewed longtime neighborhood residents, asking about their memories of local streets and landmarks. Most people he spoke with had no recollection of Elm Street, but a few shared his confusion, describing similar memories of the missing block that didn't match current reality. Mrs. Chen, who had lived in the area for over 20 years, distinctly remembered walking her dog past the coffee shop and waving to Mrs. Patterson in her garden. But when Marcus asked her to locate these places on current maps, she experienced the same disorientation he had felt, vivid memories that no longer had corresponding physical locations. Research into similar phenomena revealed that Marcus's experience wasn't entirely unique. Online forums contained scattered reports from people who remembered streets, buildings, or entire neighborhoods that seemed to have vanished without trace. These accounts shared common elements: detailed memories of familiar places that no longer existed in their expected locations, with no documentary evidence or physical remains to confirm their former existence. Some explanations focused on the psychology of spatial memory and the possibility of confabulation, the unconscious creation of false memories to fill gaps in recollection. Perhaps the missing street was a composite memory, assembled from fragments of other neighborhoods and experiences into a coherent but fictional geographic narrative. But this explanation struggled to account for the specificity and consistency of the false memories shared by multiple residents. Why would several people independently create the same fictional street, complete with similar details about businesses, residents, and physical features? More speculative theories suggested that the disappearing street phenomenon might provide evidence for shifting timelines or parallel realities. Perhaps Marcus and the other affected residents retained memories from an alternate version of their neighborhood, one where Elm Street had existed before some cosmic reshuffling erased it from current reality. Marcus approached these explanations with professional skepticism, but he couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of his own experience. His expertise in urban planning made him acutely aware of how cities develop and change over time, and the complete absence of any evidence for Elm Street's existence challenged his understanding of how neighborhoods persist and evolve. The experience fundamentally changed his relationship with familiar spaces and routine navigation. While he continued to walk the same route to work, he found himself paying closer attention to architectural details and street configurations, alert to the possibility that the urban landscape might be less stable than his training had suggested. Perhaps most significantly, the missing street taught Marcus to hold his spatial certainties more lightly. Cities, he realized, existed not just as physical infrastructure, but as collective memories and shared experiences. The fact that a street could vanish so completely, while leaving detailed memories in multiple minds, suggested that urban reality might be more collaborative and fluid than urban planning theory typically acknowledged. The triangular park remained where Elm Street should have been, serving as a pleasant green space that enhanced the neighborhood's character. But for Marcus and the few others who remembered the missing street, it also served as a reminder that even the most familiar places might contain mysteries that resisted easy explanation, spaces where memory and reality could diverge in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about the stability of the physical world. 10. The coffee shop that was never there. real estate appraiser Jennifer Walsh built her professional reputation on thorough research and meticulous attention to detail, skills that required intimate knowledge of local commercial districts and their development histories. Over 12 years of working in the downtown business corridor, she had documented the rise and fall of hundreds of establishments, tracking property values through cycles of development, renovation, and economic change. This comprehensive understanding of local commercial real estate made her encounter with the vanishing coffee shop particularly unsettling. The mystery began during a routine property assessment in the historic Arts District, where Jennifer was evaluating a vintage building for potential renovation and commercial lease. The 3-story brick structure had housed various businesses over its century-long history, and Jennifer was researching its commercial potential when she realized something crucial was missing from her mental map of the neighborhood. For the past 3 years, Jennifer had regularly visited a coffee shop called The Grind that occupied the ground floor of a building 2 blocks west of her current location. The establishment had become an integral part of her work routine, a convenient spot for meeting clients, reviewing documents, and taking breaks between property assessments. She remembered the shop's distinctive industrial aesthetic with exposed brick walls, vintage machinery repurposed as decor, and locally roasted coffee that had earned a devoted following among downtown professionals. But when Jennifer walked to where The Grind should have been located, she found an empty storefront with for lease signs that appeared to have been posted for months. The windows were covered with newspaper, and accumulated dust suggested prolonged vacancy. Most troubling was the real estate listing information, which indicated the space had been available continuously for over 2 years. Jennifer stood on the sidewalk, staring at the vacant storefront and trying to reconcile her vivid memories with the physical evidence before her. She distinctly remembered meeting her client Tom Bradley at The Grind just 2 weeks earlier, discussing renovation plans for a nearby property while sitting at the shop's communal table near the large front windows. The conversation had been productive, helped by the relaxed atmosphere and excellent coffee that had made The Grind her preferred meeting spot. But according to the current reality, that meeting could never have taken place. Jennifer began a systematic investigation, starting with her own business records and appointment calendar. Her phone showed the meeting with Tom Bradley, scheduled for 2 p.m. at The Grind, 428 Foster Street. But when she called the phone number listed in her contacts for the coffee shop, she reached a disconnected line. Her credit card statements showed no charges from any business named The Grind, despite her clear memory of purchasing coffee there multiple times per week. Most unsettling was her discovery that the address 428 Foster Street corresponded exactly to the vacant storefront she was now examining. Over the following days, Jennifer interviewed other downtown professionals who she remembered encountering at The Grind. The responses revealed a fascinating pattern of confusion and contradiction. About half the people she spoke with had no memory of any coffee shop at that location, insisting the space had been vacant for as long as they could remember. But the other half shared vivid memories similar to her own, detailed recollections of visiting The Grind, descriptions of its atmosphere and menu, and even specific conversations that had taken place there. The divided memories didn't follow predictable patterns. Age, profession, and familiarity with the neighborhood showed no correlation with which version of reality people remembered. The phenomenon seemed to cut across demographics randomly, creating 2 populations with equally confident but contradictory recollections of the same commercial space. Jennifer's investigation expanded to include municipal records and business licensing databases. No permits had ever been issued for a coffee shop at 428 Foster Street. No business license had been registered under the name The Grind at that address. Building inspection records showed the space had been classified as vacant commercial property since 2019, with no approved modifications for food service operations. Even more puzzling was her examination of online presence and digital marketing materials. The Grind had no website, no social media accounts, no online reviews or directory listings. In an era when even small businesses maintained some digital footprint, the complete absence of online evidence suggested that the coffee shop had never existed in any verifiable form. Yet, Jennifer's memories remained remarkably vivid and detailed. She could recall specific conversations with the barista, a young woman named Amy, who was studying art history at the local university. She remembered the taste of their signature lavender latte, the texture of their house-made scones, even the playlist of indie folk music that created the shop's distinctive ambiance. These weren't vague impressions, but detailed multi-sensory memories that included visual, auditory, and emotional components. When Jennifer contacted Tom Bradley to discuss their supposed meeting at the Grind, his response added another layer of mystery to the situation. Tom clearly remembered their appointment, but recalled meeting at Jennifer's office rather than at any coffee shop. He had no memory of the Grind, and seemed genuinely confused by her questions about the non-existent establishment. This discrepancy suggested that the phenomenon involved more than simple false memory. It appeared to include retroactive changes to shared experiences, with different people remembering modified versions of the same events. Jennifer began researching similar phenomena online, discovering communities of people who shared experiences of vanishing businesses and disappeared locations. The accounts were remarkably consistent, describing establishments that had seemed real and functional, but left no documentary evidence of their existence. Coffee shops, restaurants, bookstores, and retail shops that people remembered visiting regularly, but which had somehow vanished from both physical reality and official records. Some explanations focused on the psychology of urban familiarity and the possibility that detailed false memories could be constructed from fragments of similar experiences. Perhaps the Grind was a composite memory, assembled from visits to other coffee shops in different locations and time periods, then unconsciously assigned to a specific address that had always been vacant. But this explanation struggled to account for the consistency of false memories shared by multiple people, and the specific details that participants could recall about their supposed experiences at the non-existent establishment. More speculative theories suggested that the vanishing coffee shop phenomenon might provide evidence for shifting realities or parallel timelines. Perhaps some businesses existed in alternate versions of the same geographic space, occasionally becoming accessible to people from other timelines before disappearing back into their proper dimensional context. Jennifer approached these explanations with professional skepticism, rooted in her real estate expertise, but she couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of her own experience. Her work required precise knowledge of commercial property histories, and the complete absence of any evidence for the Grind's existence challenged her understanding of how businesses operate and leave traces in public records. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to property assessment and neighborhood analysis. While she continued to rely on documented evidence and official records, she also began paying attention to anecdotal accounts and informal memories that might not appear in traditional databases. The vanishing coffee shop had taught her that commercial districts might contain complexities that resisted conventional documentation. Perhaps most significantly, the missing establishment served as a reminder that urban spaces existed not just as physical infrastructure, but as networks of memory and experience. The fact that a business could feel completely real to multiple people while leaving no verifiable traces suggested that commercial reality might be more collaborative and fluid than traditional real estate practice typically acknowledged. The vacant storefront at 428 Foster Street remained available for lease, offering opportunities for entrepreneurs to create new businesses that would serve the downtown professional community. But for Jennifer and others who remembered the Grind, the empty space also represented something more mysterious. A reminder that even the most carefully documented urban environments might contain gaps and inconsistencies that challenged fundamental assumptions about how commercial districts function and persist over time. 11. A moment of sudden clarity. Philosophy professor Dr. Catherine Morrison had spent her academic career studying consciousness, perception, and the nature of reality. But her expertise was largely theoretical until she experienced what she would later describe as the most profound 30 seconds of her life. The incident occurred during an otherwise ordinary faculty meeting on a grey Tuesday afternoon in February, transforming her understanding of consciousness from abstract concept to lived reality. The meeting was proceeding with typical academic tedium: budget discussions, committee assignments, and procedural matters that required attention but rarely inspired enthusiasm. Dr. Morrison found herself in the familiar state of partial attention that such gatherings encouraged, simultaneously present and mentally elsewhere, when something extraordinary happened to her awareness. Without warning or apparent cause, her consciousness seemed to suddenly expand and clarify in ways that felt utterly unprecedented. The transformation was instantaneous, like stepping from a dimly lit room into brilliant sunlight. But the change was in her mind rather than her environment. Every thought became crystalline clear, every perception sharp and vivid, every connection between ideas illuminated with perfect transparency. The conference room around her remained physically unchanged, but Dr. Morrison's experience of it was radically transformed. She could perceive layers of meaning and connection that had been invisible moments before. Conversations between colleagues revealed patterns of motivation and intention that seemed obvious once noticed but had been completely hidden during normal awareness. The political dynamics underlying budget discussions became as clear as printed text, with each person's unspoken agenda transparent and easily readable. But the enhanced perception extended far beyond social dynamics. Dr. Morrison found herself understanding complex philosophical problems that had puzzled her for years, seeing solutions and connections that seemed elegant and inevitable in this state of heightened awareness. Questions about the relationship between mind and matter, the nature of subjective experience, and the hard problem of consciousness suddenly had answers that felt both profound and obvious. Most remarkably, she experienced a direct and unmediated understanding of her own consciousness as both observer and observed, subject and object simultaneously. The usual sense of being a separate self looking out at an external world dissolved into recognition of consciousness as a unified field of awareness within which all experience arose. It wasn't a philosophical theory or mystical belief, but immediate, undeniable knowledge that felt more certain than any fact she had ever known. The state of enhanced awareness lasted approximately 30 seconds, though Dr. Morrison's ability to track time was compromised by the intensity of the experience. When normal consciousness returned, it felt like awakening from an extraordinarily vivid dream, except that the implications seemed more real and significant than anything she had experienced in ordinary waking life. In the immediate aftermath, Dr. Morrison struggled to maintain her composure, while colleagues continued their budget discussions around her. The contrast between her expanded awareness and normal consciousness was jarring, like being suddenly forced to see through a narrow aperture after experiencing panoramic vision. Everything that had seemed clear and interconnected moments before returned to its usual opacity and fragmentation. Over the following days, Dr. Morrison attempted to analyze and understand what had happened to her. As someone trained in philosophy of mind and consciousness studies, she was familiar with various theories about altered states of awareness, from mystical experiences to neurological anomalies. But academic knowledge provided limited insight into the immediate reality of expanded consciousness. The enhanced awareness had felt qualitatively different from anything in her previous experience. Not like heightened concentration or creative insight, but like accessing a fundamentally different mode of consciousness that revealed aspects of reality normally hidden from ordinary perception. The philosophical solutions that had seemed so clear during the experience remained intellectually compelling when examined through normal consciousness, but they lacked the immediate certainty and vivid understanding that had characterized the expanded state. Dr. Morrison began researching neurological explanations for sudden changes in consciousness. Temporal lobe epilepsy could produce brief episodes of altered awareness, often accompanied by feelings of profound meaning and understanding. But her experience lacked the sensory distortions and physical symptoms typically associated with seizure activity. She had remained fully functional and oriented during the enhanced awareness, able to perceive her environment and track the ongoing meeting without any apparent impairment. Other neurological phenomena offered partial parallels but incomplete explanations. Migraine auras could produce temporary changes in perception and cognition, but typically involved visual disturbances and discomfort that Dr. Morrison hadn't experienced. Flow states and peak performance conditions could create feelings of expanded awareness and effortless understanding, but they were usually associated with specific activities and developed gradually rather than appearing instantaneously. The sudden onset and comprehensive nature of the consciousness shift seemed to resist conventional neurological classification. Dr. Morrison had transitioned from normal awareness to expanded perception and back again within seconds, with no apparent trigger or residual effects beyond the memory of the experience itself. Her investigation expanded to include research into spontaneous mystical experiences and altered states of consciousness reported across various cultures and historical periods. Many contemplative traditions described states of expanded awareness similar to what she had experienced. Moments of sudden clarity where the nature of reality became directly apparent. Consciousness revealed its own fundamental character, and ordinary divisions between self and world temporarily dissolved. These accounts shared common elements with Dr. Morrison's experience: instantaneous onset, profound sense of understanding, direct perception of consciousness itself, and lasting impact on worldview despite brief duration. But they also typically occurred within specific spiritual practices or life circumstances that didn't match her situation of sitting in an academic meeting while discussing budget allocations. Some researchers suggested that such experiences might represent temporary access to latent capabilities of human consciousness, brief glimpses of awareness potential that remained largely dormant under ordinary circumstances. Perhaps the brain occasionally experienced spontaneous states of enhanced integration and processing that revealed patterns and connections normally below the threshold of conscious perception. Other theories focused on the possibility that consciousness itself might have properties and dimensions that weren't typically accessible to ordinary awareness. Maybe the feeling of expanded perception reflected temporary alignment with aspects of reality that existed beyond the conventional boundaries of individual consciousness, moments when personal awareness connected with larger patterns of meaning and understanding. Dr. Morrison approached these explanations with academic rigor, but she found herself changed by the experience in ways that extended beyond intellectual curiosity. The brief encounter with expanded consciousness had provided direct evidence that awareness could operate in modes fundamentally different from everyday experience, challenging assumptions about the limits and nature of human perception. The experience also influenced her teaching and research, adding experiential depth to theoretical discussions about consciousness and reality. When students struggled with abstract concepts about the nature of mind or the relationship between subjective and objective reality, Dr. Morrison could draw on her direct encounter with these phenomena to provide more nuanced and compelling explanations. Perhaps most significantly, the moment of sudden clarity taught her to remain open to possibilities that existed beyond conventional academic categories. Philosophy had trained her to analyze and theorize about consciousness, but her brief experience of expanded awareness reminded her that direct knowledge might sometimes be more immediate and certain than theoretical understanding. The faculty meeting where the incident occurred eventually concluded with typical academic resolutions about budget priorities and committee assignments. But for Dr. Morrison, those 30 seconds of enhanced consciousness continued to serve as a reference point for questions about the nature of awareness, the boundaries of normal perception, and the possibility that reality might contain dimensions of meaning and understanding that occasionally became accessible to ordinary human consciousness. The experience remained unique in her life, never repeated despite her attention to the possibility of recurrence. But its memory continued to inform her understanding of consciousness as something far more complex and mysterious than conventional academic frameworks typically acknowledged, opening spaces for wonder and inquiry that enriched both her personal and professional engagement with the deepest questions about mind and reality. 12. The scar that vanished and returned. Emergency room physician Dr. Maria Santos had spent 15 years treating trauma patients, developing an expert eye for wound assessment, healing patterns, and scar formation. Her medical training required precise attention to physical details, particularly when documenting injuries for legal purposes or tracking recovery progress over time. This clinical expertise made her encounter with her own disappearing and reappearing scar particularly bewildering. The scar in question was located on her left forearm, a thin but clearly visible line approximately 2 inches long that had resulted from a childhood accident when she was 8 years old. Maria remembered the incident vividly, falling from her bicycle onto a broken piece of concrete that had created a deep laceration requiring 12 stitches. The wound had healed well, but it left a permanent mark that served as a lasting reminder of that painful summer afternoon. For 32 years, the scar had been a constant feature of Maria's physical landscape. As someone who worked with her hands and frequently examined her own arms while washing and preparing for medical procedures, She was intimately familiar with every mark and characteristic of her own skin. The bicycle accident scar was particularly noticeable because of its location and distinctive appearance. A straight line that had faded to pale white, but remained clearly visible against her olive complexion. The disappearance occurred on a Thursday morning in April, during Maria's routine preparation for a busy shift in the emergency department. She was scrubbing her hands and forearms according to standard surgical protocol when she noticed something unusual about her left arm. The familiar scar from her childhood bicycle accident was completely absent, leaving unmarked skin in the exact location where it had existed for over 3 decades. Maria paused her scrubbing routine and examined her forearm carefully under the bright surgical lighting. The skin where her scar should have been located was smooth and uniform, showing no evidence that any injury had ever occurred. There was no fading mark, no subtle difference in texture, no trace of the distinctive line that had been part of her physical identity since childhood. The absence was particularly striking because Maria knew her own body with medical precision. She had documented this specific scar on numerous occasions, including during her medical school physical examination, insurance medical evaluations, and routine health assessments. The mark had been photographed and measured as part of various medical records, creating a documented history of its existence and characteristics. Initially, Maria wondered if she might be experiencing some form of visual distortion or temporary neurological symptoms. Medical training had taught her to consider perceptual errors when physical evidence didn't match expectations. But careful examination under multiple lighting conditions confirmed that the scar was genuinely absent, not simply difficult to see or temporarily obscured. Over the following 3 days, Maria found herself checking her forearm repeatedly, expecting the familiar scar to reappear as suddenly as it had vanished. The absence felt profound and unsettling, like losing a longtime companion, or discovering that a fundamental assumption about her own body had been incorrect for decades. On Sunday evening, while preparing dinner at home, Maria glanced down at her left forearm and froze. The scar was back, appearing exactly as it had before its mysterious disappearance. The thin white line occupied its familiar position, with the same length, orientation, and subtle textural characteristics that she remembered from years of casual observation. Maria immediately examined the returned scar under careful lighting, comparing its appearance with her detailed memories from before its disappearance. Every aspect seemed identical. The way it caught light at certain angles, the slight irregularity near one end where the original wound had been deepest, even the surrounding skin tone and texture. It was as if the scar had never been absent, except for her clear memory of its 3-day disappearance. As a physician, Maria began documenting the phenomenon with clinical precision. She photographed her forearm from multiple angles, measured the scar's dimensions, and noted its exact location relative to anatomical landmarks. She also reviewed her medical records to confirm the documented history of the childhood injury and its resulting scar formation. Medical records clearly confirmed the scar's existence throughout her adult life. Insurance physicals, employment health screenings, and routine medical examinations all included references to the forearm scar from bicycle accident. The documentation provided objective evidence that contradicted any possibility that she had imagined or misremembered the mark's existence. Maria also consulted dermatology colleagues about possible explanations for temporary scar disappearance and reappearance. Certain skin conditions could cause temporary changes in pigmentation or texture that might affect scar visibility, but these typically involved gradual fading rather than complete disappearance and sudden return. No known medical conditions could explain the complete absence and restoration of scar tissue over such a brief time frame. Research into similar phenomena revealed scattered accounts from other people who had experienced temporary disappearance of scars, birthmarks, and other permanent skin features. Online forums contained discussions about marks that vanished for days or weeks before returning unchanged, creating confusion and concern among people who had lived with these features for years or decades. Some explanations focused on psychological factors and the possibility that stress or distraction could create temporary blind spots in self-perception. Perhaps the scar had been present throughout its apparent absence, but changes in attention or awareness had prevented Maria from noticing it during her examinations. This theory suggested that the phenomenon was perceptual rather than physical, but Maria's medical training made her confident in her observational skills and attention to detail. Her examination had been thorough and deliberate, conducted under optimal lighting conditions with the systematic approach she used for clinical assessments. The possibility that she had simply failed to notice a familiar and distinctive scar seemed inconsistent with her professional competence and personal familiarity with her own body. Other theories explored more exotic possibilities, drawing from quantum mechanics and speculative physics to suggest that physical objects might occasionally exist in superposition states, simultaneously present and absent, until observation forced them into a single configuration. Perhaps scars and other body features could temporarily access quantum properties typically reserved for subatomic particles. More speculative explanations suggested that the disappearing scar phenomenon might provide evidence for multiple timelines or parallel realities. Maybe some people occasionally shifted between similar but distinct versions of themselves, carrying memories from one timeline while temporarily inhabiting a body from another where specific injuries had never occurred. Maria approached these explanations with medical skepticism, but she couldn't dismiss the clear evidence of her own experience. Her training emphasized the importance of careful observation and accurate documentation, skills that made her confident that the scar had genuinely vanished and returned rather than simply being overlooked or misperceived. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to physical assessment and patient care. While she continued to rely on evidence-based medicine and systematic examination techniques, she also became more attentive to patients' reports of unusual physical phenomena that didn't fit standard medical categories. The disappearing scar had taught her that even the most familiar and well-documented physical features might occasionally behave in ways that challenged conventional understanding. Perhaps most significantly, the temporary absence of her childhood scar served as a reminder that the boundary between permanent and temporary, between fixed physical reality and fluid possibility, might be more permeable than medical training typically acknowledged. The mark continued to serve its original function as a reminder of her childhood accident, but it also became a symbol of the mysterious and unpredictable nature of physical existence itself. 13. The phantom scar from a dream. Sleep researcher Dr. David Kim had built his career studying the neurological mechanisms of dreaming, specializing in the relationship between REM sleep and memory consolidation. His laboratory was equipped with advanced EEG monitoring systems, and his research had contributed to understanding how the brain processes experiences during different sleep stages. This expertise in sleep science made his encounter with a dream-generated physical scar particularly troubling, because it challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundary between mental and physical reality. The incident began with an unusually vivid nightmare that Dr. Kim experienced during a routine sleep study he was conducting on himself as part of a research protocol. He had volunteered to serve as a test subject for new monitoring equipment, spending the night in his laboratory while EEG sensors recorded his brain activity throughout different sleep phases. The dream itself was remarkably detailed and realistic, involving a scenario where Dr. Kim found himself trapped in a burning building, searching for escape routes while smoke and flames surrounded him. During the dream sequence, he experienced falling through a weakened floor and landing hard against a piece of twisted metal that slashed across his right shoulder blade, creating a deep and painful wound. The sensation of injury in the dream was extraordinarily vivid. Dr. Kim could feel the sharp metal cutting through skin and muscle, could smell his own blood, could experience the specific type of burning pain associated with serious lacerations. The dream wound throbbed with realistic discomfort that seemed to persist even as other elements of the nightmare shifted and changed around him. Dr. Kim woke abruptly from the dream around 3 a.m., his heart racing and skin damp with perspiration, typical of intense nightmare experiences. The laboratory monitoring equipment had recorded elevated heart rate, increased respiration, and brainwave patterns consistent with REM sleep interruption. But as Dr. Kim sat up in the monitoring bed, he became aware of a persistent aching sensation in his right shoulder blade, exactly where the dream injury had occurred. Initially, he attributed the discomfort to sleeping in an unfamiliar position or the stress of wearing monitoring equipment. Physical sensations from dreams could sometimes persist briefly after waking, particularly when the dream experiences had been especially intense or realistic. But as Dr. Kim moved around the laboratory and stretched his shoulders, the aching sensation intensified rather than fading. When he reached back to touch the area of discomfort, Dr. Kim felt something that made him immediately turn on the laboratory lights for closer examination. His fingertips encountered a raised line of skin approximately 4 inches long, running diagonally across his right shoulder blade in exactly the location where the dream metal had cut him. Using the laboratory's mirror and adjustable lighting, Dr. Kim was able to examine his shoulder blade thoroughly. What he discovered was clearly a fresh scar, a thin, raised line of healing tissue that appeared to be several days old based on its color and texture. The mark was tender to touch and showed all the characteristics of a real healing wound, despite the fact that Dr. Kim had no memory of sustaining any actual injury to his shoulder. The scar's location and orientation matched his dream experience with perfect precision. The length, angle, and positioning were exactly as he remembered from the nightmare, as if the fictional injury had somehow manifested as actual tissue damage while he slept. Dr. Kim documented the phenomenon with scientific rigor, photographing the mysterious scar from multiple angles and measuring its dimensions with the same precision he used for research data collection. He also reviewed the EEG recordings from his sleep session, confirming that the nightmare had occurred during normal REM sleep with no unusual brain activity patterns that might suggest seizure or other neurological abnormalities. Medical examination revealed that the scar showed typical characteristics of healing tissue formation. The mark was slightly raised, with the pale coloration and firm texture consistent with wounds that had closed and begun the remodeling phase of recovery. Most puzzling was the apparent age of the healing process. The scar appeared to be approximately 1 week old, suggesting that the injury would have occurred several days before the dream that supposedly created it. Dr. Kim consulted with dermatology colleagues and wound care specialists seeking explanations for the appearance of healing scars without corresponding injuries. Various skin conditions could create raised marks or changes in pigmentation, but none typically produced linear scars that resembled healed lacerations. The mark on his shoulder blade had all the characteristics of genuine wound healing, not spontaneous skin abnormalities. Research into similar phenomena revealed scattered accounts of people developing physical marks or scars that corresponded to injuries experienced in dreams. Medical literature contained case studies of stigmata-like phenomena and psychosomatic injuries, but these typically occurred in contexts involving extreme psychological stress or specific religious or cultural belief systems that didn't match Dr. Kim's situation. Some explanations focused on the possibility of self-inflicted injury during sleep, with the dream providing a fictional narrative to explain unconscious scratching or other physical trauma. Sleep-related movement disorders could cause people to injure themselves without conscious awareness, potentially creating wounds that were later rationalized through dream content. But Dr. Kim's sleep had been monitored throughout the night, with video recording that showed no unusual movement or behavior that could have resulted in the shoulder injury. He had remained in normal sleep positions without any evidence of thrashing, scratching, or other activities that might create physical wounds. The monitoring equipment also confirmed that the nightmare had lasted only approximately 12 minutes of REM sleep time, making it unlikely that any real injury could have been sustained and begun healing during such a brief period. The scar's apparent age suggested a healing process that had been underway for several days, predating the dream that supposedly created it. More speculative explanations explored the possibility that consciousness could occasionally influence physical reality in ways that challenged conventional understanding of mind-body relationships. Perhaps intense dream experiences could somehow trigger actual physiological changes, creating real tissue modifications that corresponded to imagined injuries. Other theories suggested that the dream scar phenomenon might provide evidence for precognitive or non-linear aspects of consciousness. Maybe the nightmare had been a psychic preview of a future injury that was then somehow manifested in the present, creating physical evidence of an event that existed outside normal temporal sequences. Dr. Kim approached these explanations with scientific skepticism rooted in his sleep research expertise, but he couldn't dismiss the physical evidence of the mysterious scar. His training had taught him to rely on measurable phenomena and reproducible results, but his personal experience challenged assumptions about the boundaries between mental and physical processes. The experience fundamentally changed his approach to dream research and consciousness studies. While he continued to investigate sleep phenomena through conventional neuroscience methods, he also began exploring edge cases and anomalous experiences that didn't fit standard categories of understanding. The dream scar had revealed gaps in knowledge about how consciousness and physical reality interacted during sleep states. Perhaps most significantly, the phantom scar from his dream served as a lasting reminder that the relationship between mind and body might be more complex and mysterious than scientific training typically acknowledged. The mark continued to be visible and palpable months after its mysterious appearance, serving as physical evidence that the boundaries between imagined and real experiences might occasionally become permeable in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and physical reality. 14. Hearing your name when no one's there. Audiologist Dr. Lisa Chang had spent 12 years diagnosing and treating hearing disorders, developing expertise in the complex mechanisms of auditory perception and the various ways that sound processing could malfunction. Her clinical experience included extensive work with auditory hallucinations, phantom sounds, and perceptual distortions that could accompany everything from hearing loss to neurological conditions. This professional background made her personal experience with phantom name-calling particularly intriguing. The phenomenon began during a quiet evening at home in late October, when Dr. Chang was reading research papers in her study, while soft classical music played in the background. The house was peaceful, with her partner working late and no neighbors or street activity to create ambient noise. She was deeply focused on a complex study about cochlear implant effectiveness, when she clearly heard someone call her name from the direction of the kitchen. "Lisa!" The voice was distinct and unmistakable. A clear, urgent call that seemed to come from approximately 20 feet away. The tone suggested someone needed immediate attention, with the kind of inflection that typically indicated a minor emergency or important question. Dr. Chang immediately looked up from her reading and listened for follow-up sounds that might explain who was calling and what they needed. But the house remained completely quiet, except for the gentle classical music still emanating from her computer speakers. Initially, Dr. Chang assumed she had misheard something, perhaps a combination of musical phrases and ambient house sounds that her auditory processing system had interpreted as her name. The brain was remarkably skilled at finding patterns and meaning in random noise, and auditory pareidolia could create the perception of voices or words in everyday sounds like running water, air conditioning, or electronic devices. She paused her music and listened carefully for several minutes, but heard only the typical subtle sounds of a quiet house, the refrigerator cycling, minor settling noises from the structure, and distant traffic from the street beyond her yard. No voices, no movement, no indication that anyone else was present in the house. Dr. Chang returned to her reading, but 15 minutes later, the phenomenon repeated with even greater clarity. "Lisa, can you come here?" This time, the voice included additional words that made the call seem even more realistic and urgent. The tone was familiar, resembling her partner's voice, but she knew he was at work and wouldn't return home for several hours. The direction of the sound remained consistent with the kitchen location, and the volume suggested normal conversation distance rather than distant or muffled speech. Again, Dr. Chang investigated the source of the voice, checking every room in the house, and even stepping outside to determine if neighbors might be calling to someone with a similar name. The investigation revealed nothing. She was alone in the house. No electronic devices were producing speech, and no external sources could account for the clear voice she had heard. Over the following weeks, the phantom name-calling became a regular occurrence, happening 2 or 3 times per week at various times of day. The voices weren't always the same. Sometimes they resembled her partner's voice. Other times, they sounded like family members or friends, and occasionally they were completely unfamiliar. But they consistently called her name with realistic tone and inflection, often including additional phrases that made the call seem genuine and urgent. As an audiologist, Dr. Chang began documenting the phenomenon with clinical precision. She noted the time, duration, apparent location, and characteristics of each phantom voice, looking for patterns that might reveal underlying causes. She also conducted hearing tests on herself to rule out any changes in auditory function that might contribute to perceptual distortions. Her hearing remained normal across all frequency ranges, with no evidence of hearing loss, tinnitus, or other auditory abnormalities that might explain the phantom voices. The phantom name-calling occurred during periods of normal alertness and good health, with no correlation to fatigue, stress, medication use, or other factors that might affect auditory perception. Research into auditory hallucinations revealed that hearing one's name called was among the most commonly reported phantom sounds, experienced by a significant percentage of the population at least occasionally. Unlike more complex auditory hallucinations that might indicate psychiatric or neurological conditions, hearing one's name was often considered within the range of normal perceptual variation. Some explanations focused on the brain's specialized attention systems for processing personally relevant sounds. Humans were evolutionarily primed to detect their own names and respond quickly to calls that might indicate danger, assistance needs, or social communication. Perhaps this heightened sensitivity occasionally created false positives, interpreting random sounds as name-calling when no actual voice was present. Other theories suggested that phantom name-calling might result from memory activation and auditory replay systems. The brain constantly processed and stored auditory experiences, and sometimes these memory traces might be spontaneously reactivated, creating the perception of hearing previously recorded sounds in the absence of external stimuli. Dr. Chang found these explanations scientifically plausible but experientially incomplete. The phantom voices she heard weren't vague or indistinct. They were clear, well-articulated, and often included specific tonal qualities that matched familiar speakers. The calls felt immediate and present rather than memory-like, and they consistently came from specific locations rather than seeming to originate inside her head. More intriguing were theories that explored non-local aspects of consciousness and communication. Some researchers suggested that phantom name-calling might represent genuine psychic or telepathic phenomena, with distant people actually thinking about or trying to contact the person who heard their name. While such explanations lacked scientific validation, they offered accounts for the realistic quality and emotional resonance of phantom voice experiences. Environmental factors also provided possible explanations for some phantom name-calling incidents. Radio waves, electromagnetic fields, and electronic devices could occasionally interact with dental fillings or other metallic objects in the body to create auditory sensations. But Dr. Chang's experiences occurred in various locations and circumstances that made electronic interference unlikely as a consistent cause. The phantom name-calling continued irregularly over several months, becoming a familiar, if mysterious aspect of Dr. Chang's daily experience. The calls never resulted in any negative consequences. They were simply brief interruptions that required momentary attention before being dismissed as perceptual anomalies. But the experience did change her approach to patient care and auditory assessment. When clients reported hearing their names called or other phantom sounds, Dr. Chang found herself listening with greater empathy and less immediate assumption that such experiences indicated pathology. Her personal encounter with phantom voices had taught her that auditory perception could include mysteries and ambiguities that resisted easy medical classification. Perhaps most significantly, hearing her name when no one was there served as a reminder that consciousness and perception operated according to principles more complex than clinical training typically acknowledged. The phantom voices existed in a liminal space between subjective and objective reality, between internal mental processes and external environmental stimuli, opening questions about the nature of auditory experience that extended far beyond conventional audiology. The calls continued to occur occasionally, maintaining their realistic quality and emotional impact despite Dr. Chang's understanding of their probably illusory nature. They served as ongoing reminders that the boundary between imagination and perception, between internal and external experience, might be more fluid than scientific frameworks typically assumed, creating spaces where mystery could coexist peacefully with professional expertise. 15. The voice that whispered from nowhere. Sound engineer Malcolm Rivers had devoted his career to understanding audio in its most technical aspects, working with recording equipment sensitive enough to capture sounds at the threshold of human perception. His home studio was acoustically treated and equipped with professional monitoring systems that could reveal the subtlest details in any audio environment. This expertise in sound analysis made his encounter with an unexplained whispering voice particularly puzzling. The incident occurred during a late-night mixing session when Malcolm was working on a complex music project that required careful attention to sonic detail. He was using high-end headphones to isolate specific instrumental tracks when he became aware of a voice that seemed to be speaking just below the level of conscious perception. Words that felt almost familiar, but remained tantalizingly unclear. At first, Malcolm assumed the voice was bleeding through from the music tracks he was processing. Sometimes vocals or instrumental elements could create patterns that resembled speech, particularly when heard at low volumes or through audio processing effects. But when he removed his headphones and paused the playback, the whispering continued. The voice was distinctly human, speaking in what sounded like conversational English, but the words remained just beyond comprehensibility. It wasn't the random syllables of auditory pareidolia, or the vague mumblings that might result from electronic interference. The speech patterns had natural rhythm and inflection that suggested meaningful communication, even though Malcolm couldn't quite decipher the specific content. Most unsettling was the voice's apparent location. It seemed to come from directly behind his left shoulder, close enough that he could almost feel breath on his neck, but when he turned around, nothing was there. The positioning was precise and consistent, not the diffuse sensation that might result from room acoustics or reflected sound. Malcolm began systematic troubleshooting, using his professional expertise to eliminate possible technical sources for the mysterious voice. He powered down all electronic equipment in the studio, unplugged audio cables, and even switched off the electrical circuit to ensure that no electronic devices could be generating the sounds. The whispering continued unabated. He also checked for external sources, open windows that might allow distant conversations to enter the studio, thin walls that could transmit voices from neighboring apartments, or electronic devices in adjacent spaces that might be producing audio. The studio was well isolated acoustically, and his investigation revealed no external sources that could account for the persistent whispering. Using his professional audio equipment, Malcolm attempted to record the voice that he could clearly hear. He positioned sensitive microphones at various locations around the studio, including the spot directly behind his left shoulder, where the voice seemed to originate. But when he played back the recordings, they contained only silence and the barely audible ambient noise typical of a quiet room. The contradiction was deeply troubling for someone whose career depended on accurate audio perception and measurement. Malcolm could clearly hear the whispering voice with his own ears, but his professional equipment, designed to capture sounds far below normal hearing thresholds, detected nothing whatsoever. Over the following nights, the whispering voice became a regular phenomenon during Malcolm's late-night studio sessions. The voice seemed most active during the quiet hours after midnight, speaking continuously in its incomprehensible but clearly structured patterns. Sometimes the tone seemed urgent or excited, other times it adopted what sounded like conversational or explanatory inflections. Malcolm began keeping detailed notes about the voice's characteristics and behavior. The speech patterns remained consistent with natural human conversation, including pauses, emphasis, and tonal variations that suggested emotional content. But despite hours of careful listening, he could never quite resolve the words into recognizable language, as if the voice existed just below the threshold of linguistic comprehension. Research into similar phenomena revealed that unexplained voices were more common than Malcolm had expected. Online forums and paranormal research sites contained numerous accounts from people who had experienced mysterious speaking or whispering that couldn't be recorded or verified by others. The reports shared common elements, voices that seemed human and meaningful but remained incomprehensible, sounds that appeared to come from specific locations but had no detectable source. Some explanations focused on psychological factors and the possibility that stress or isolation could create auditory hallucinations. Late-night work sessions, combined with the intensity of focused listening required for audio engineering, might create conditions that encouraged perceptual distortions or phantom sounds. The brain's pattern recognition systems could potentially construct voice-like perceptions from random neural activity or ambient sound processing. But Malcolm's experience felt qualitatively different from typical auditory hallucinations. The voice had consistent characteristics and behavioral patterns that seemed external rather than internally generated. Its apparent location remained stable, and its speech patterns followed natural conversational rhythms that would be difficult to unconsciously manufacture through hallucination. Technical explanations explored the possibility that Malcolm's sensitive audio equipment might be creating electromagnetic fields or other environmental factors that could influence auditory perception. Some people were sensitive to electrical fields or radio frequencies in ways that could create subjective sound experiences, particularly in environments with multiple electronic devices and complex wiring systems. However, the whispering voice continued, even when all electronic equipment was powered down and disconnected. The phenomenon seemed independent of the studio's technical environment, suggesting that electromagnetic interference was unlikely to be the primary cause. More speculative theories suggested that the whispering voice might represent communication from sources that operated outside normal physical channels. Some researchers proposed that consciousness could occasionally access information or communication from non-local sources, creating perception of voices that existed in dimensions not typically accessible to ordinary awareness. Malcolm approached these explanations with the skepticism his technical training encouraged, but he couldn't dismiss the reality of his own perceptual experience. The voice remained clear and consistent despite its incomprehensible content, creating a puzzle that challenged his understanding of both audio technology and human perception. The whispering voice continued to visit Malcolm's studio irregularly over several months, always maintaining its mysterious blend of familiarity and opacity. He developed a kind of companionable relationship with the phenomenon, treating it as an unusual but harmless aspect of his late-night work environment. But the experience also changed his approach to audio engineering and sound analysis. Malcolm became more attentive to anomalous sounds and acoustic phenomena that didn't fit standard categories of understanding. His encounter with the untraceable voice had taught him that auditory experience might include dimensions that resisted both technical measurement and conventional explanation. Perhaps most significantly, the whispering voice served as a reminder that reality might contain forms of communication and consciousness that operated according to principles more complex than technological frameworks typically acknowledged. The voice existed in the liminal space between perception and imagination, between objective measurement and subjective experience, opening questions about the nature of sound and consciousness that extended far beyond conventional audio engineering. 16. Déjà vu in the cafe. Cognitive scientist Dr. Rebecca Martinez had spent her career studying memory formation and the neural mechanisms underlying familiar and unfamiliar experiences. Her research included extensive work on déjà vu phenomena, investigating the brain processes that created the uncanny feeling of having experienced identical situations before. This academic expertise made her personal encounter with an extended and detailed déjà vu episode particularly significant. The incident occurred at a small cafe near the university campus, where Dr. Martinez often met with students and colleagues. She had visited the Daily Grind dozens of times over several years, making it a familiar and comfortable location for informal academic discussions. But on this particular Thursday afternoon in March, her routine coffee meeting transformed into something far more mysterious and unsettling. Dr. Martinez had arranged to meet graduate student Kevin Chen to discuss his dissertation research on memory consolidation. She arrived a few minutes early and chose a corner table that offered privacy for their academic conversation. The cafe was moderately busy with its typical mix of students, faculty, and local professionals, creating the kind of ambient buzz that provided good background for focused discussion. When Kevin arrived and began describing his latest research findings, Dr. Martinez experienced the onset of what initially seemed like ordinary déjà vu. The conversation felt familiar in a way that suggested they had discussed these exact topics in this exact location before. But as the meeting progressed, the feeling of repetition became increasingly detailed and specific. Dr. Martinez found herself anticipating not just the general direction of Kevin's comments, but his precise words and phrases. She knew he was about to mention a specific research paper before he named it, could predict the exact questions he would ask about statistical analysis, and even anticipated the gestures he would use while explaining complex concepts. The familiarity was so complete that she felt like she was watching a movie she had seen many times before. But the most unsettling aspect was her clear memory that this exact meeting had never actually occurred. Dr. Martinez kept detailed calendar records and meeting notes as part of her academic routine, and she was certain that she and Kevin had never previously discussed his current research findings. His dissertation work was relatively new, and many of the papers he referenced had been published only recently. As the Déjà Vu episode continued, Dr. Martinez began testing her apparent precognitive knowledge by mentally predicting specific details before they occurred. She correctly anticipated that Kevin would spill a small amount of coffee on his notes, that a particular student would enter the cafe and order a complicated drink, and that construction noise from across the street would interrupt their conversation at precisely 3:47 p.m. Each prediction proved accurate, creating an increasingly surreal experience where Dr. Martinez felt like she was participating in a carefully scripted event rather than a spontaneous conversation. The familiarity was so detailed and comprehensive that it transcended normal déjà vu phenomena, suggesting either extraordinary precognitive abilities or genuine repetition of an impossible identical scenario. The episode lasted approximately 90 minutes, encompassing the entire meeting from Kevin's arrival to their departure from the cafe. Throughout this period, Dr. Martinez maintained normal conversational engagement while simultaneously experiencing the profound strangeness of knowing exactly what would happen next in a situation that was supposedly occurring for the first time. When the meeting concluded, Dr. Martinez found herself in the peculiar position of having clear memories of two identical conversations, the one that had just occurred, and the earlier version that she somehow remembered despite its impossible non-existence. Both memories felt equally real and detailed, creating a cognitive dissonance that challenged her understanding of how memory and time typically operated. Over the following days, Dr. Martinez investigated possible explanations for her extended déjà vu experience, approaching the mystery with the same systematic methodology she used for her academic research. She reviewed her calendar and meeting notes to confirm that the conversation with Kevin had indeed been their first discussion of his current research topics. She also interviewed Kevin to determine whether he had experienced any similar feelings of repetition during their meeting. Kevin's response was illuminating and troubling. He clearly remembered their cafe conversation, but had no sense of déjà vu or unusual familiarity. From his perspective, the meeting had been a straightforward first discussion of his recent research progress. But when Dr. Martinez described some of her specific predictions, the coffee spill, the construction noise timing, the student's complicated drink order, Kevin confirmed that these details had occurred exactly as she had anticipated. Medical and neurological explanations for extended déjà vu typically focused on temporal lobe activity and the brain's mechanisms for distinguishing between familiar and unfamiliar experiences. Seizure activity in specific brain regions could create persistent feelings of familiarity, but such episodes usually involved confusion and disorientation that Dr. Martinez hadn't experienced. Her consciousness had remained clear and analytical throughout the 90-minute episode. Other neurological explanations suggested that déjà vu might result from timing delays in neural processing, with information reaching conscious awareness through multiple pathways at slightly different speeds. This could create the illusion of familiarity when the same experience was processed twice with a brief delay. But standard déjà vu episodes typically lasted only seconds or minutes, not the extended duration that Dr. Martinez had experienced. The predictive accuracy of her apparent precognitive knowledge posed additional challenges to conventional explanations. If the déjà vu had resulted from memory confusion or neural processing delays, it shouldn't have enabled accurate prediction of specific future events, like the construction noise timing or other people's behavior. Some theories explored the possibility that consciousness might occasionally access information from outside normal temporal boundaries. Perhaps déjà vu represented brief glimpses of parallel timelines or future scenarios, allowing people to experience events before they occurred in linear time. This could explain both the feeling of familiarity and the accurate predictions that characterized extended déjà vu episodes. More speculative explanations suggested that time itself might not operate as linearly as commonly assumed. Perhaps consciousness could occasionally experience temporal loops or repetitions, actually reliving identical scenarios multiple times while retaining memories from previous iterations. This could account for the detailed familiarity and predictive accuracy that transcended normal déjà vu phenomena. Dr. Martinez approached these theories with scientific caution, but her experience had provided compelling evidence that consciousness and time might interact in ways more complex than her academic training typically acknowledged. The extended déjà vu had felt qualitatively different from any previous experience, suggesting access to information that existed outside normal memory and perception processes. The incident also influenced her research directions and theoretical perspectives. While she continued studying memory formation through conventional neuroscience methods, she also began investigating edge cases and anomalous experiences that might reveal previously unknown aspects of consciousness and temporal perception. Perhaps most significantly, the Café Déjà Vu taught Dr. Martinez to remain humble about the boundaries of scientific understanding. Memory and consciousness, she realized, might contain mysteries that resisted easy categorization, operating according to principles that hadn't yet been identified or understood by conventional research methods. The Daily Grind continued to serve as a meeting place for academic discussions. But for Dr. Martinez, it had also become a reminder that ordinary experiences might occasionally reveal extraordinary aspects of consciousness and reality. The corner table where she had experienced extended déjà vu served as a physical anchor for questions about time, memory, and the nature of subjective experience that extended far beyond traditional cognitive science. 17. Misplaced timelines of celebrity deaths. Entertainment journalist Lisa Pemberton had built her career on staying current with celebrity news and maintaining accurate records of significant events in popular culture. Her work required precise attention to dates, timelines, and biographical details, skills that had earned her a reputation for reliability among readers and industry colleagues. This expertise made her encounter with misplaced celebrity death timelines particularly disturbing. The confusion began when Lisa was researching background information for a retrospective article about 1990s television comedy. She was compiling a list of notable actors and writers from that era when she decided to include information about beloved comedian John Candy, whose work had defined much of the decade's humor landscape. Lisa distinctly remembered writing a tribute article about Candy's death several years earlier, sometime around 2009 or 2010. She recalled the circumstances clearly, researching his filmography, interviewing colleagues who had worked with him, and crafting a piece that celebrated his contributions to comedy while mourning the loss of such a talented performer. The article had been well received, generating significant reader engagement and social media discussion. But when Lisa searched her publication archives and personal files for the tribute article, she discovered something that challenged her professional memory. According to official records, John Candy had died in 1994, more than 15 years before she had supposedly written about his passing. Her employment records showed that she hadn't even begun her journalism career until 1998, making it impossible for her to have covered his death as a current news event. The discrepancy was deeply troubling because Lisa prided herself on factual accuracy and maintained meticulous records of her published work. She could remember specific details about researching and writing the Candy tribute, the interviews she conducted, the photographs she selected, even the emotional impact of learning about his sudden death from heart failure. But according to documented evidence, none of this work had ever occurred. Lisa began investigating other celebrity deaths that she remembered covering, looking for patterns that might explain her confused timeline. She discovered several similar discrepancies, clear memories of writing about deaths that had occurred years before she began her journalism career, complete with detailed recollections of research, interviews, and publication processes that couldn't have happened. The false memories weren't vague or uncertain. Lisa could recall specific conversations with editors about story angles, remember the challenges of reaching family members for comment, and even visualize the layout and photographs used in articles that had apparently never been written. The memories felt as authentic and detailed as any real experiences from her professional career. When Lisa consulted colleagues and industry records to verify her recollections, the responses revealed a fascinating pattern of confusion. Several other entertainment journalists shared similar experiences, vivid memories of covering celebrity deaths that had occurred before their careers began, complete with detailed recollections of reporting and writing processes that couldn't have taken place. The phenomenon wasn't limited to professional journalists. Online forums revealed that many people had similar confused timelines about celebrity deaths, remembering news coverage and public reactions that had occurred during periods when they were too young to have followed such events, or had been living in circumstances that wouldn't have exposed them to entertainment news. Some explanations focused on the psychology of memory reconstruction and the brain's tendency to blend information from different time periods into coherent but false narratives. Perhaps Lisa had learned about John Candy's death years after it occurred, then unconsciously constructed detailed memories of covering the event by combining later knowledge with professional experiences from other stories. But this explanation struggled to account for the specificity and emotional resonance of the false memories. Lisa's recollections weren't just factual information about when someone died. They included detailed procedural memories about journalism work, complete with sensory details and emotional responses that would be difficult to unconsciously construct from disparate sources. Media saturation and repeated exposure to celebrity information could potentially explain some timeline confusion. News stories, documentaries, and tribute articles were regularly recycled and republished, creating multiple exposure opportunities that might blur the temporal boundaries of when information was first encountered. However, Lisa's false memories included specific details about her own writing and reporting processes that couldn't have been derived from consuming other people's coverage. She remembered conducting original interviews, making editorial decisions, and experiencing the satisfaction of completing well-received articles, personal professional experiences that were distinct from simply reading about celebrity deaths. More intriguing were theories that explored nonlinear aspects of time and consciousness. Perhaps some people occasionally experienced memories from alternate timelines or parallel careers, retaining detailed recollections of professional work that had occurred in different versions of their personal history. This could explain both the authenticity of the memories and their factual impossibility within current timeline constraints. Other theories suggested that consciousness might sometimes access collective cultural memories or archetypical experiences that felt personal despite being shared across populations. Maybe the experience of covering celebrity deaths represented participation in collective cultural processing of loss and grief, creating memories that felt like personal professional experience, but were actually participation in larger social narratives. Lisa approached these explanations with journalistic skepticism, but she couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of her own memory experiences. Her training had taught her to distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources, but her encounter with false professional memories revealed that even personal recollection could be unreliable in ways that challenged basic assumptions about identity and career history. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to fact-checking and source verification. While she continued to rely on documented evidence and official records, she also became more attentive to the limitations of memory and the possibility that even vivid personal recollections might not correspond to actual historical events. Perhaps most significantly, the misplaced timeline phenomenon taught Lisa to remain humble about the boundaries between personal and collective experience. Memory, she realized, might be more collaborative and fluid than journalism training typically acknowledged, operating according to principles that blended individual recollection with shared cultural narratives in ways that created vivid but sometimes impossible personal histories. The celebrity deaths she had supposedly covered remained significant cultural events that had affected millions of people worldwide. But for Lisa, they had also become reminders that the boundary between personal and collective memory, between individual experience and shared cultural processing, might be more permeable than professional training typically suggested, opening questions about the nature of identity and autobiography that extended far beyond entertainment journalism. 18. Remembering an event that happened years too early. History professor Dr. Robert Hayes had devoted his academic career to studying the precise chronology of 20th century political events, developing expertise in dating historical incidents, and understanding their temporal relationships to broader cultural movements. His research required meticulous attention to timelines, causation sequences, and the careful verification of when specific events had occurred. This scholarly precision made his personal experience with temporally displaced memories particularly puzzling, The incident involved Dr. Hayes' vivid recollection of watching the Berlin Wall fall on television when he was a senior in high school during the 1987-1988 academic year. The memory was extraordinarily detailed and emotionally resonant. He could remember the specific classroom where he and his classmates had gathered around a small television to watch history unfold, the excitement and disbelief of witnessing such a momentous event, and the lengthy discussions with his history teacher about the geopolitical implications of German reunification. But according to historical records, the Berlin Wall didn't fall until November 1989, more than a year after Dr. Hayes had graduated from high school and begun his freshman year at college. The timeline discrepancy was particularly troubling because Dr. Hayes' memory of the event was embedded in a web of contextual details that placed it definitively during his senior year of high school. He remembered discussing the wall's collapse in the context of his senior history class, writing a term paper about Cold War dynamics that incorporated the recent events, and sharing the excitement with specific classmates whose names and faces he could still recall clearly. Most significantly, Dr. Hayes remembered the Berlin Wall's fall as a formative experience that influenced his decision to pursue European history as a college major and eventual academic specialization. The dramatic television footage and classroom discussions had crystallized his interest in understanding how historical forces shaped contemporary events, setting him on the academic path that defined his professional career. But his high school transcripts and academic records showed no evidence of any term paper about German reunification or classroom discussions about the Berlin Wall's collapse. His college application essays, written during his actual senior year in 1988, focused on different historical interests and made no mention of recent events in Germany. Dr. Hayes began investigating his temporally displaced memory with the same systematic approach he used for historical research. He contacted former classmates and teachers to determine if they shared any recollection of watching the Berlin Wall fall during the 1987-1988 school year. The responses revealed that no one else remembered experiencing this historical event during their high school years. His former history teacher, who had remained in close contact with Dr. Hayes throughout his academic career, confirmed that the class had never watched live coverage of the Berlin Wall's fall. She clearly remembered incorporating the actual 1989 events into her curriculum the following year, but had no recollection of any similar classroom experience during Dr. Hayes' senior year. School newspapers and yearbooks from 1987 to 1988 contained no references to the Berlin Wall or German reunification, despite covering other contemporary political events that had occurred during that academic year. The historical record was clear and consistent. The Berlin Wall had fallen in November 1989, not during Dr. Hayes' senior year of high school. Yet his memory of experiencing this event as a high school senior remained vivid and emotionally compelling. Dr. Hayes could visualize the classroom layout, remember the specific students who had been present, and even recall the ambient details like weather and time of day. The memory felt as authentic and reliable as any other significant experience from his adolescence. Medical explanations for temporally displaced memories typically focused on confabulation and the brain's tendency to reconstruct past experiences by combining information from different time periods. Perhaps Dr. Hayes had learned about the Berlin Wall's fall during college, then unconsciously relocated this information to his high school years while constructing a coherent personal narrative about his developing interest in European history. But the false memory was remarkably specific and detailed, including not just factual information about the historical event, but procedural memories about classroom experiences, social interactions, and academic work that would be difficult to unconsciously construct from later knowledge. The memory also included emotional responses and personal significance that felt authentic rather than reconstructed. Psychological research on false memory implantation had demonstrated that detailed fictional memories could be created through suggestion and social reinforcement. But Dr. Hayes' displaced memory appeared to be spontaneous rather than externally influenced. No one had suggested that he might have experienced the Berlin Wall's fall during high school. The false memory seemed to have developed independently through his own cognitive processes. More speculative explanations explored the possibility that consciousness might occasionally access information from alternate timelines or parallel versions of personal history. Perhaps Dr. Hayes retained memories from a different version of his life, where historical events had occurred according to different chronologies, creating authentic recollections of experiences that hadn't happened in his current timeline. Other theories suggested that the temporally displaced memory might represent a form of precognitive experience, with Dr. Hayes somehow accessing future knowledge about the Berlin Wall's fall before it actually occurred. This could explain both the temporal displacement and the formative impact that the memory had on his academic interests and career direction. Dr. Hayes approached these explanations with scholarly skepticism rooted in his historical training, but he couldn't dismiss the compelling quality of his own memory experience. His expertise in chronology and historical verification made him confident that the Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989, but his personal recollection of experiencing this event as a high school senior felt equally certain and authentic. The experience fundamentally changed his approach to teaching and historical research. While he continued to emphasize the importance of accurate dating and chronological precision, he also became more attentive to the subjective and personal aspects of historical memory. His encounter with temporally displaced recollection had taught him that individual memory and documented history could diverge in ways that challenged assumptions about how people experience and remember significant events. Perhaps most significantly, the false memory of watching the Berlin Wall fall during high school served as a reminder that personal autobiography and historical chronology existed in complex relationship to each other. Memory, he realized, might operate according to emotional and psychological logic that differed from factual and temporal accuracy, creating personal narratives that felt true despite their historical impossibility. The Berlin Wall's actual fall in 1989 remained a significant historical event that Dr. Hayes studied and taught with scholarly precision. But his false memory of experiencing it as a high school senior had also become an integral part of his personal and professional identity, serving as a reminder that the boundary between subjective experience and objective history might be more complex and permeable than academic training typically acknowledged. 19. Doppelgangers on the bus. Social psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster had spent years studying facial recognition and the cognitive mechanisms that allowed humans to distinguish between different individuals. Her research included work on prosopagnosia, pareidolia, and the various ways that face processing could malfunction or create false matches. This expertise in visual perception made her encounter with multiple doppelgangers during a routine bus commute particularly intriguing and unsettling. The incident occurred on a Thursday morning in September, during Dr. Foster's regular journey from her residential neighborhood to the university campus. She typically used the 30-minute bus ride for reading and preparation, settling into a window seat and observing the familiar mix of commuters, students, and downtown workers who shared her morning routine. About 10 minutes into the journey, as the bus filled with passengers from various stops, Dr. Foster noticed something unusual about the demographic composition of the riders. An extraordinarily high percentage of the passengers bore striking resemblances to people she knew personally: colleagues, students, family members, and friends from various periods of her life. Initially, Dr. Foster assumed she was experiencing a variant of pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon where familiar patterns are perceived in random stimuli. Faces were particularly susceptible to this effect, with the brain's specialized face recognition systems often finding similarities between strangers and known individuals. Combined with the routine nature of her commute, it seemed reasonable that she might be unconsciously seeking familiar features among the anonymous crowd. But as Dr. Foster paid closer attention to the passengers around her, the resemblances became increasingly specific and numerous. The woman sitting 3 rows ahead looked remarkably similar to her graduate school advisor, Dr. Catherine Williams. Not just general facial features, but specific details like eye shape, nose structure, and even characteristic expression patterns that Dr. Foster remembered from years of academic meetings. Across the aisle sat a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to her brother-in-law, including distinctive features like a particular type of beard growth, specific eyebrow shape, and even similar clothing preferences. Near the front of the bus, a young woman appeared to be nearly identical to one of Dr. Foster's undergraduate students, complete with matching hairstyle and facial structure. Most unsettling was the discovery that approximately 2/3 of the bus passengers showed recognizable similarities to people from Dr. Foster's personal and professional life. The statistical probability of encountering so many lookalikes during a single bus ride seemed astronomically unlikely, even accounting for the human tendency to find familiar patterns in random faces. Dr. Foster began systematically documenting the phenomenon, using her expertise in facial recognition to analyze the specific features that created each resemblance. The matches weren't based on single characteristics like hair color or general build, but involved multiple facial features that combined to create overall impressions of strong similarity to known individuals. The resemblances also spanned different periods of Dr. Foster's life: childhood friends, college roommates, former colleagues, current students, and family members from various generations. It was as if the bus had been populated by a representative sample of everyone she had ever known, transformed into strangers who retained the essential facial characteristics of familiar people. When Dr. Foster attempted to make eye contact or engage with some of the doppelgangers, their responses confirmed that they were indeed unfamiliar individuals rather than actual people she knew. The woman who resembled her graduate advisor showed no recognition when Dr. Foster tried to catch her attention, and her mannerisms and behavior patterns were completely different from the remembered characteristics of Dr. Williams. The experience lasted for the remainder of the bus journey, with new passengers who boarded at subsequent stops continuing to show remarkable resemblances to people from Dr. Foster's life. By the time she reached her campus destination, she had counted nearly 20 distinct lookalikes among the approximately 30 passengers who had shared her commute. Over the following days, Dr. Foster rode the same bus route at the same time, paying careful attention to passenger demographics and facial characteristics. The subsequent journeys revealed normal diversity among commuters, with occasional resemblances that fell within expected statistical ranges for random facial similarities. The mass doppelganger phenomenon appeared to have been a unique, one-time occurrence. Research into similar experiences revealed scattered accounts from people who had encountered multiple lookalikes during specific events or time periods. Online forums contained discussions about doppelganger days, when strangers seem to unusually resemble known individuals, creating feelings of surreal familiarity in everyday social environments. Some explanations focused on perceptual priming and the psychology of attention. Perhaps Dr. Foster's specialized expertise in facial recognition had created heightened sensitivity to facial similarities, causing her to notice resemblances that would typically escape conscious attention. Combined with the routine nature of her commute, this enhanced awareness might have revealed patterns that were always present but rarely observed. Other theories suggested that the doppelganger phenomenon might represent a form of psychological projection, with stress or preoccupation causing people to unconsciously impose familiar features onto strangers' faces. The brain's face processing systems could potentially create false matches when emotional or cognitive factors influence perception in ways that prioritize familiarity over accuracy. More speculative explanations explored the possibility that consciousness might occasionally access information about parallel realities or alternate versions of familiar people. Perhaps the bus doppelgangers represented glimpses of how known individuals might appear in different timelines or dimensional contexts, creating recognizable similarities without exact matches. Environmental factors also provided possible explanations for clustered doppelganger experiences. Geographic regions often showed statistical clustering of certain facial features due to genetic heritage and population history. Perhaps Dr. Foster's bus route passed through neighborhoods with demographic characteristics that increased the likelihood of encountering people with features similar to her personal acquaintances. Dr. Foster approached these explanations with scientific skepticism rooted in her research expertise, but she couldn't dismiss the profound strangeness of encountering so many lookalikes during a single commute. Her training in facial recognition made her confident that the resemblances had been genuine and numerous, even if their underlying cause remained mysterious. The experience fundamentally changed her approach to studying facial perception and social recognition. While she continued to investigate face processing mechanisms through conventional research methods, she also began exploring edge cases and anomalous experiences that might reveal previously unknown aspects of how humans perceive and categorize facial information. Perhaps most significantly, The doppelganger bus ride served as a reminder that everyday social environments might contain mysteries that resisted easy scientific categorization. The familiar faces of strangers had created a liminal space between known and unknown, between personal and anonymous, opening questions about the nature of recognition and identity that extended far beyond conventional psychology. The bus route continued to serve as Dr. Foster's regular commute to campus, but it had also become a reminder that ordinary experiences might occasionally reveal extraordinary aspects of perception and consciousness. The memory of riding among familiar strangers served as an ongoing invitation to remain attentive to the subtle mysteries that could emerge within even the most routine aspects of daily life. 20. The instinct that saved a life. Emergency medical technician Carlos Mendoza had relied on professional training and protocol throughout 8 years of responding to medical crises. But his experience on a quiet Sunday afternoon in October challenged his understanding of how intuition and life-saving decisions sometimes operated beyond conscious reasoning. The incident would become a defining moment in his career, demonstrating that emergency response sometimes involved forms of knowledge that transcended standard medical training. The call came in as a routine welfare check. An elderly resident in a downtown apartment building hadn't been seen by neighbors for several days, and the building manager was concerned enough to request a medical evaluation. These calls were common in Carlos's urban district, often resulting in simple reassurance or minor medical interventions for isolated seniors who had experienced temporary health issues or mobility problems. Carlos arrived at the apartment building with his partner, Jenny, expecting a straightforward assessment that would either provide peace of mind or identify the need for appropriate medical or social services. The building manager led them to apartment 4B, where 73-year-old Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez lived alone with minimal family contact and few close social connections. When no one answered their knocking and verbal announcements, the building manager used his master key to open the apartment door. Carlos and Jenny entered the small, tidy living space, calling out to announce their presence and listening for any response that might indicate Mrs. Rodriguez's location or condition. The apartment appeared normal, clean, organized, with no obvious signs of distress or medical emergency. Mrs. Rodriguez was found sitting peacefully in her favorite armchair, appearing to be asleep with a gentle expression and natural positioning that suggested comfort and relaxation. Her breathing appeared regular, her color looked healthy, and there were no visible signs of injury or acute medical distress. By all standard indicators, Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to be simply napping in her chair, probably unaware that concerned neighbors had requested a welfare check. The appropriate protocol would have been to gently wake her, conduct a brief health assessment, and provide reassurance to the building manager and concerned neighbors. But as Carlos approached Mrs. Rodriguez to check on her condition, he experienced an overwhelming and inexplicable certainty that something was seriously wrong, despite all evidence to the contrary. The feeling wasn't based on any observable symptoms or clinical indicators. It was a profound intuitive conviction that Mrs. Rodriguez was in immediate life-threatening danger that required aggressive medical intervention. The instinct was so powerful and urgent that Carlos immediately began emergency assessment procedures, checking for pulse, respiratory rate, and neurological responsiveness with the intensity appropriate for a critical medical emergency. His actions seemed excessive and potentially inappropriate given Mrs. Rodriguez's peaceful appearance, but the intuitive alarm was too strong to ignore. Carlos's assessment revealed that Mrs. Rodriguez was indeed unconscious rather than sleeping, with barely detectable pulse and severely compromised breathing that indicated life-threatening medical crisis. Her peaceful appearance had masked the fact that she was experiencing respiratory failure and cardiac distress that would have resulted in death within minutes if not immediately addressed. Working with Jenny, Carlos began aggressive resuscitation efforts, providing ventilation support and cardiac monitoring, while calling for advanced life support backup. Mrs. Rodriguez's condition was far more critical than her external appearance had suggested, requiring intensive medical intervention that wouldn't have been provided if Carlos had relied on visual assessment rather than his inexplicable intuitive alarm. The hospital emergency team later determined that Mrs. Rodriguez had experienced a silent heart attack, followed by gradual respiratory depression that had left her in a state of impending cardiac arrest. Her peaceful appearance had resulted from the specific nature of her medical crisis, which had progressed without the dramatic symptoms typically associated with life-threatening conditions. Most significantly, the medical team confirmed that Mrs. Rodriguez would have died within minutes if Carlos hadn't initiated immediate resuscitation efforts. The timing of the intervention had been crucial. Any delay would have resulted in irreversible cardiac arrest and death. Carlos's inexplicable instinct to treat her as a critical emergency patient rather than a sleeping senior had directly saved her life. In the weeks following the incident, Carlos struggled to understand how he had known to provide emergency intervention when all observable evidence suggested that Mrs. Rodriguez was simply napping. His medical training provided no framework for understanding intuitive knowledge that operated independently of clinical indicators and standard assessment protocols. The experience also raised questions about the nature of emergency medical intuition and the role of non-rational knowledge in life-saving decisions. Carlos had relied on protocol and observable symptoms throughout his career, but Mrs. Rodriguez's case suggested that effective emergency response might sometimes require access to information that existed beyond conscious reasoning and clinical training. Research into medical intuition revealed that experienced healthcare providers often reported similar experiences, moments when they knew something was wrong, despite normal clinical presentations, or felt compelled to take actions that seemed excessive but proved to be life-saving. These accounts suggested that medical expertise might include unconscious pattern recognition and intuitive assessment capabilities that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. Some explanations focused on subliminal sensory processing and the possibility that Carlos had unconsciously detected subtle indicators of Mrs. Rodriguez's critical condition, barely perceptible changes in skin color, breathing patterns, or other physical signs that his trained observation skills had recognized without conscious awareness. Emergency medical training might create sensitivity to danger signals that operated through intuitive channels rather than explicit reasoning. Other theories explored the possibility that consciousness could occasionally access information through non-local or psychic channels, particularly in situations involving life-threatening emergencies. Perhaps the urgency of Mrs. Rodriguez's medical crisis had somehow communicated itself directly to Carlos's awareness, bypassing normal sensory channels and creating the compelling instinct to provide immediate intervention. More speculative explanations suggested that emergency responders might develop enhanced sensitivity to the energetic or vital signs of human consciousness, detecting threats to life through mechanisms that transcended conventional medical assessment. This could explain both the accuracy of Carlos's intuitive alarm and its independence from observable clinical indicators. Carlos approached these explanations with the pragmatic skepticism that characterized emergency medical work, but he couldn't dismiss the life-saving accuracy of his inexplicable instinct. His experience with Mrs. Rodriguez had demonstrated that effective emergency response might require openness to forms of knowledge that operated beyond standard medical protocols. The incident fundamentally changed Carlos's approach to patient assessment and emergency response. While he continued to rely on established protocols and clinical training, he also began paying attention to intuitive impressions and gut feelings that might provide additional information about patient condition and treatment priorities. Perhaps most significantly, Mrs. Rodriguez's rescue served as a reminder that the boundary between rational and intuitive knowledge, between conscious assessment and unconscious awareness, might be more permeable in emergency situations than medical training typically acknowledged. The instinct that had saved her life existed in a liminal space between professional competence and mysterious knowing, opening questions about the nature of healing and emergency response that extended far beyond conventional medical education. Mrs. Rodriguez made a full recovery and remained grateful to Carlos for the intervention that had saved her life. But for Carlos, the incident had become more than a successful emergency response. It was a reminder that life-saving work might occasionally require trust in forms of knowledge that operated according to principles more complex and mysterious than standard medical protocols typically acknowledged. As we reach the end of our journey through these 20 remarkable accounts of reality's glitches, we find ourselves standing at the threshold between the known and unknown, between the explicable and mysterious. Each story we've explored represents a moment when the ordinary world revealed itself to be more complex, more fluid, and more wonderfully strange than our everyday experience typically suggests. From disappearing keys that return to their designated spots, to streets that vanish overnight only to leave memories in their wake, these glitches remind us that reality might not be as solid and predictable as we often assume. They challenge our understanding of how objects behave in space, how memories form and persist, and how consciousness interacts with the physical world around us. What makes these experiences particularly compelling is their ordinariness. These aren't dramatic supernatural encounters or extraordinary mystical visions. They're small impossibilities that emerge within the fabric of daily life. Brief moments when the universe seems to hiccup and reveal glimpses of something deeper and more mysterious beneath the surface of routine existence. The people who experienced these glitches weren't seeking the unusual or extraordinary. They were going about their normal lives, commuting to work, organizing their homes, meeting friends for coffee, riding public transportation, when reality decided to demonstrate its capacity for surprise and mystery. This accessibility makes the phenomena both more relatable and more unsettling, suggesting that anyone might encounter their own glitch in the Matrix during even the most mundane moments. Perhaps most significantly, these stories remind us that wonder and mystery haven't disappeared from our modern, scientific world. Despite our technological sophistication and theoretical understanding, the universe continues to present us with experiences that resist easy explanation. Small miracles that invite us to remain curious and open to possibilities that exist beyond our current frameworks of understanding. Whether these glitches represent quirks of perception, glimpses of parallel realities, or something else entirely, they serve an important function in keeping our minds flexible and our sense of wonder alive. They remind us that the world is far more interesting and enigmatic than we often remember, full of small mysteries waiting to surprise anyone who pays close enough attention. As you continue through your own daily routines, perhaps you'll find yourself more alert to the subtle anomalies and gentle impossibilities that might be occurring around you all the time. Maybe you'll notice when reality seems to skip like a scratched record, when the ordinary world reveals its extraordinary depths, or when the universe offers you a brief glimpse behind the curtain of everyday existence. The glitches are out there, waiting patiently in the margins of normal experience, ready to remind us that life is far more mysterious and wonderful than we typically acknowledge. All we need to do is remain open to the possibility that the impossible might be more possible than we think, and that the most profound mysteries might be hiding in plain sight within the most familiar corners of our everyday lives. After all, in a universe vast enough to contain quantum mechanics, consciousness, and the simple miracle of existence itself, who's to say what's truly impossible? The glitches suggest that reality itself might be far more creative, playful, and mysterious than our daily experience typically reveals. And that's a wonderful thing to remember as we navigate our own journeys through this strange and beautiful world. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of life's beautiful impossibilities. May you remain forever curious about the mysteries that surround us, and may you be fortunate enough to experience your own glitches in the wonderful, weird matrix of existence.